January 21st, 2014, City of Troy Zoning Board of Appeals meeting. Before we get going, and for those of you who are here in December, I'm going to go through and read sort of an orientation statement to explain how the board operates. The Board of Zoning Appeals is a group of 7 of your neighbors or peers appointed by City Council to pass judgment on requests for variances and other matters that are brought before them. A variance is a relaxation of the literal provisions of the zoning ordinance. Petitioners may indicate a hardship or practical difficulty running with the land that would warrant the granting of the variance. The board will hear the items in the order that they appear on the agenda. When an item is called, the chairman will verify that the petitioner is present. Then the city administration will summarize the facts of the case. The petitioner will then be given an opportunity to address the board to explain the justification for the action requested. After the petitioner makes their presentation and answers any questions that the board may have, the chairman will open the public hearing. Any person wishing to speak on the request should come forward, and when they're at the podium, they may say their name, address, and their association with the property, such as they live next door, live behind the property, etc. At that point, they should state whether they are in favor or against the variance request and give reasons for their opinion. Comments must be directed through the chairman. Comments should be kept as brief as possible and closely pertain to the matter under consideration. Only one person will be recognized by the chairman to speak at one time. During the public comment time period, each speaker will be allowed 3 minutes to voice their thoughts on a given matter. At the conclusion of these public comments, the chairman will close the public hearing. Once the public hearing is closed, no other public comment will be taken unless in response to a specific question by a member of the board. The board will then make a motion to approve, deny, or table, which means to delay the request. In order for the request to pass, a minimum of 4 votes for approval are needed. If the request is not granted, the applicant has the right to appeal the board's decision to the Oakland County Circuit Court. Now, having read that, I'd also like to note that for those of you who may have been in attendance last month or maybe watched the video on TV, we did have an information technology challenge, let me say, in which we did not notify all parties within a 300-foot boundary or radius of the hearings that we are going to hear tonight. So the 3 hearings that we have before us tonight, which is covered under Part 4 of the agenda, were discussed in some detail last month. However, because we did not accomplish the proper notification time frame, we had to do an additional mailing and hold everything over to this month. So in that regard, this meeting is a little bit different, but the order of business will carry through just as it did last month and months preceding. Having said that, I'm going to move forward with the agenda. And Mr. Evans, could you call the roll, please?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Bloomingdale.
Here.
Mr. Clark.
Here.
Mr. Courtney.
Here.
Mr. Eisenbacher.
Here.
Mr. Neal.
Here.
Mr. Krent.
Here.
Mr. Lambert.
Here.
Mr. Chair.
Item number 2, approval of minutes for the December 17, 2013 minutes. Does any board member have a comment for these minutes, any revisions or desire to move for approval?
Approved as written?
Mr. Bloomfield, were you?
Yes.
Okay.
I move that they be moved as written.
Support.
Thank you. Mr. Evans, could you call the question on that item?
Mr. Clark.
Yes.
Mr. Courtney.
Yes.
Mr. Eisenbacher.
Yes.
Mr. Neal.
Yes.
Mr. Krent.
Yes.
Mr. Lambert.
Yes.
Mr. Bloomingdale.
Yes.
Item 3, approval of agenda. I have no changes proposed to change the agenda. Does staff have anything?
No changes.
Okay. Anything from a board member? With that, we'll move forward to item 4. 4A is a variance request. I think it would probably be best, Mr. Evans, to go through and give your presentation?
Yes, I think for the benefit of anyone who was not here last month, we'll go through the same presentation that we did last month and then proceed in the same manner that we did last month. But this time, the board will be permitted to deliberate towards a determination.
Have at it.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As printed in the agenda, this is a variance request for property at 1201 and 1305 Stevenson Highway in order to construct in addition to both buildings that will connect the buildings, a 10-foot variance to the required minimum 10-foot side yard setback. The variance is needed for both properties. I'd like to direct everybody's attention to the overhead behind the board. What I've provided is an aerial view of the neighborhood with the subject properties. There are two properties outlined in red. Now in this aerial view, Stevenson Highway is in the middle, and this property is just south of Maple Road. Now this is a closer view of the aerial, and what I've done is I've overlaid in different colors the zoning classifications for the neighborhood. Now the subject properties are overlaid in gray, as well as the property to the northwest, the west, and the south. Now those properties are zoned integrated industrial business. Now the properties in purple to the north and across the street, across Stevenson to the east, are zoned research center. Now this is the site plan that the applicant has submitted, and Stevenson Highway is on the right. We have both buildings, one to the north and one to the south. And what they want to do is connect the buildings with a 14-foot wide, I guess you call it a covered building. The structure proposed to connect both buildings is 62 feet in length, and it's the gray delineation in the middle of this drawing, in the middle of the blue circle. Now, I've also overlaid a dashed line running from the left to the right of the site plan that delineates the side lot line that separates the two properties. Now, the zoning ordinance requires that any additions to each of these buildings be at least 10 feet away from that red line, that side lot line. And with the addition to both buildings essentially straddling the lot line, they will have no setback to the required side property line. The applicant at the last meeting also provided some renderings, which has been included in this month's board agenda packet. And I'll turn it back over to the board for any questions that you may have.
Thank you. Before I have the petitioner come up, is there any questions for staff from the board?
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
wanted to ask a question of staff and appreciate the follow-up that you gave. I believe Mr. Eisenbacher had asked a request for some similar type variances in the past. One of them was Beaumont Hospital, I believe, and one may have been Somerset Collection.
Right.
The difference, though, we appreciate that information, but the difference we're facing here tonight is the fact that even though it's a common landlord between the two buildings, both buildings have different owners. Is that the issue that's at the crux of the decision?
Right. Both buildings do have different owners, although the tenant is the same for both buildings.
Thank you.
Any additional questions for staff from the board? Is the applicant or the representatives here? If you could come forward. I know you had an opportunity to present last month, but if there's anything you'd like to restate or add, please go ahead. One item I believe, and if you could speak to this, I think it would answer a question, is my understanding is there was an agreement that if in the future you were to vacate the building, that the structure would be removed?
Yes.
If you can comment on that as part of it, I think that'll answer a couple of questions.
Certainly. Well, again, good evening, members of the board. My name is Jonathan Martone, and I appear upon the applicant, Witzeman. Who was here last week, or last month when we were here, was Marvin Pisarczyk. Unfortunately, he was called overseas on business at the last minute. I had the opportunity to discuss the matter with Mr. Evans. With me is Steve Reeder, who is the plant manager of the facility there in Troy. He is up to speed and familiar with this entire matter and should be able to answer any specific questions you may have, but I just wanted to address it as a preliminary matter. As the chairman aptly mentioned, we did appear here last month and went into some detail regarding the substance of our application. Most of it is contained within the paper application that we made as part of this matter, but certainly we are happy to reiterate many of those points. The practical difficulty that we highlighted last month, as well as in our application, impacts the shallowness of the lots. If you were to look at the lots as they were from a direction heading to the west. Unfortunately, both lots are structured that they don't provide for a adequate and economically feasible manner in which we could expand due to rear setback requirements, also due to parking lot requirements that make it infeasible for one particular lot to be developed and expanded the building for economic utility purposes. As a result, it forces the applicant Witzeman to lease 2 buildings that are side by side. And then, as a result of its own business practices, in order to better create efficiencies, to promote better safety within its workplaces, seeking the opportunity to build this breezeway, as we call it, which would connect the 2 buildings and provide for a more seamless transition of the parts from one facility into the other. As it currently stands, and this was addressed last month, excuse me, we have to load parts onto a truck from one building to the south and drive it to the northern building and then unload it. That creates inefficiencies in terms of time, as well as creates workplace dangers as you're having individuals physically load and unload the trucks. And so this was a proposed manner in which we would better address that situation. As it relates to the specific question which Mr. Chairman had addressed, yes, there was an agreement with both landlords that should Witzeman terminate the lease, or at the end of the lease termination, at whatever point that comes, it is our contractual obligation to return both properties to their original state, which means we would remove this breezeway, repair the building so that they would appear as if this never occurred. And that is something that both landlords had required, and we gladly accepted. This, I will say, this opportunity to build this breezeway will position the applicant to extend its leases in both buildings. It wants to make a long-term investment in the city of Troy with these particular buildings, and discussing the matter with Mr. Prasarchuk, I believe that we would be in a position to do that in that case. Also, for just a matter of update, when we were last here, I think I'd highlighted that Witzeman was in discussions to lease a 3rd building. It has determined that it will lease that 3rd building, and so now it's in the final stages of the contract execution. So in a matter of a few years' time, Witzeman has come in, had brought 150 employees into the city of Troy area, and is now will be executing its 3rd lease. So we're pleased about that, especially because the building in particular, I believe, was vacant for nearly 8 years at this point. So we're pleased that we're able to locate to this area, the city of Troy, and the proposed plan, I think, will make this a more seamless workplace.
One question for reference. Is that the new building to the west? It joins to the west or something?
The new building is to the northwest, I believe.
Which one? You can see it on the white, right at the top.
The white roof?
The white
Yeah.
one, correct.
Okay, thank you. Are there any questions for the applicants from the board? Mr. Lambert?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Have you explored any other legal ways of dealing with this situation? Because as we talked about, the peculiarity of the zoning ordinance, which I think Mr. Krenn had noted at our last meeting, is the fact because there are 2 legal owners here, that's what the real problem is. Have you pursued any other legal remedies that would allow, for example, swapping of ownership or some other type of legal structure to deal with this if for some reason we turn down your application?
Well, to answer the question, have we considered it? Yes. I think the economic practicalities of it would require that one of the 2 landlords actually agree to sell the property, which I think neither one of them is in a position to do. They both have Witzeman as a long-term tenant, which is something that I think both of them were very desirous of. And so I think short of either a sale between one or the other, or some sort of condominiumization of that property, which neither owner expressed a desire to do, would be forced to consider alternative plans or potentially alternative buildings either within the city of Troy or elsewhere.
Thank you.
Mr. Courtney, was there? No? Oh, okay. Sorry, Mr. Clark.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just have one quick question, and I'm looking through the materials and I can't find it. Maybe you addressed this, I'm sure, last time. But since the last meeting was before Christmas and New Year's, everything seems to be a big blur. So just the facade of the breezeway, as you call it, what is that made of? It looks like it's stone or masonry of some sort, but is that like pressed concrete,
It will be a brick
brick?
of brick nature. It will be uniform in color as depicted between the two buildings, so it will create a sense of uniformity. It is set back some 300 feet from the road, so for cars passing by, it will be near impossible to see it unless you turn your head 90 degrees to the west, actually, particularly view it if you're heading southbound on Stevenson Highway.
Thank you.
And as a refresher for me, I know this question was asked last month, but just because we have two meetings,
Not a problem.
you will be joining the parking lots at the rear so that you have a traffic flow from Stevenson to both the south building and the north building?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Does that require any special modifications to either fencing or the roadway?
Just
parking
removal
lots?
of the fence, I believe, between the two lots.
Okay.
Some grade,
Yeah,
a
patching
little
and
bit of
whatnot.
grading
All right.
to the two.
Are there any additional questions for the applicants? No? Thank you.
Thank you.
Please take your seat. We may call you up if something comes up, but we appreciate you coming back. I'd like to open the public hearing on this portion of the meeting, or for this portion of this item, rather. Is there anyone here in the gallery who would like to speak on this particular issue? If so, please come forward. Seeing none, I'm going to close the public hearing. I'm going to bring this back before the board for discussion. Is there any thoughts or comments from the board? Mr. Clark?
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. I would just inquire of our planning commissioner, Imbed, in the committee here, if he had any further any discussions on this matter with his colleagues and staff related to, no, there wasn't a meeting between that meeting and this, previous meeting and
There
this?
was, but it was not on the
Okay.
agenda.
Thank you.
Any additional comments or thoughts from the board on the matter? Mr. Krent?
Yeah, I'm going to rely on the city's zoning board of appeals handbook for guidance. And this is under the heading of use of ordinance standards and under practical difficulty as applied to non-use and dimensional variances, which this variance is being requested of. The standards for non-use and dimensional variances, I won't read all of the details on it, but it does say granting of a non-use variance requires the existence of a practical difficulty which is demonstrated by showing that, and then number one is special or unique conditions and circumstances exist which are particular to the land, structure, or building involved and which are not generally applicable to other lands, structures, or buildings in the same district. What I find, and then I'll go into a little more detail, it's under the special conditions or circumstances, it's stated that that use or development of the property immediately adjoining of an adjoining property in question has characteristics that are special. And I find this is a very special situation where you find, no problem, I don't know, I haven't researched every building in ownership of every building in this district, but it would probably be very rare to find two adjoining buildings with a common tenant. And since none have been brought up during our public comment on it, I see that there's a way to grant this variance with one condition, and that is, and it was already stated by the applicant, that the connector, so-called breezeway, will be removed when the tenant vacates one or both of the buildings. So I see a reason to approve based on our zoning board of appeals handbook. Now that's the tough, it's always usually the tough one. It's the finding the practical difficulty. The remaining four of the 5 items, B through E, as already noted in their application, things like is it harmful to the surrounding neighbors, or does it create a safety problem? Those problems don't exist in this situation. So I would move to approve the variance based on what I'm reading out of our zoning board of appeals handbook for practical difficulties.
Support.
Thank you, Mr. Krent. And thank you, Mr. Courtney. You're supporting the motion to approve, Mr. Courtney?
Correct.
Correct. Is there any discussion regarding the motion that's before the board? Mr. Eisenbacher?
Yes, I agree with the comments that Mr. Krent just made. It does make sense to approve. I do have one point about the other two applications that have been approved in the past with the bridges for Somerset and the bridge at Beaumont. Although those two properties were owned by the same person, they were not contiguous. There was a piece of other owner's property in between that this case doesn't even have someone else's property in between. In the other two cases, it was publicly owned property in between that the city granted free use of. It does make sense to approve this, and I would add that the three items that were listed in 2007 for the Beaumont Hospital equally apply now, which, except for it's not for staff and patient safety, but it's for employee of the business safety to not have to do excessive loading, unloading, and additional traffic of a truck on a major road.
Thank you, Mr. Eisenbacher. Is there any additional comments regarding the item as it sits before us for discussion?
Mr. Chairman?
Mr. Lambert?
Just a question for staff, either Mr. Evans or Ms. Dufresne, whoever wants to handle this one. Can we include into this motion a stipulation that if there's a change in, if either the buildings is vacated by the tenant, can we require that as part of our motion that connecting building be dismantled, number one, and number two, if we can, is there a way for the city to track that to make sure it actually happens if something like that occurs?
Well, I can say that Mr. Krent's motion did include that, and there is a way of the city to track that. We have a video and meeting minutes. And are you asking for like a legal rendering as well from the city attorney's office, if that's okay to do as part of a motion? Are you asking that?
Yes, yes.
I don't see a problem. It's been offered by the applicant that that's a stipulation that they're willing, so I don't see a problem with having that as part of the motion.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lambert. Any additional comments regarding the motion to approve, which is before us? Seeing none, Mr. Evans, can you call the question?
Mr. Courtney?
Yes.
Mr. Eisenbacher?
Yes.
Mr. Neal?
Yes.
Mr. Krent?
Yes.
Mr. Lambert?
Yes.
Mr. Bloomingdale?
Yes.
Mr.
Yes.
Clark?
Yes.
Congratulations, you have your variance. Good luck to you and your business. Moving on to item 4B, Mr. Evans, can you give us the workup on that?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Item 4B, as indicated in the agenda, is a variance request for property at 268 through 388 John R. in order to construct parapet walls, a 5-foot variance to the required maximum 30-foot height limit. I'd like to direct everybody's attention to the overhead behind the board. I've shown an aerial of the property in question. The property is outlined in red on the overhead. This subject property is located near the northeast corner of John R. Road and 14 Mile. This is the same aerial with zoning categories overlaid in color. Now, the subject property and also the property to the west and the north in the orangish peachish color are zoned business classifications. The property adjacent and to the east in the gray is zoned integrated industrial business. The property south is in the city of Madison Heights. This is the first aerial I've shown, and what I've done is superimposed a blue circle on part of the entrance driveway on the property. The next few slides I'm going to show are pictures that illustrate the existing condition of the facades, and then I'm going to have some additional slides that will show what they want to do and why they need a variance. These pictures were taken from a location inside this blue circle, and what we have is the existing facades facing east, and the subject matter involves heightening some of these facades to a height of 35 feet. Now, they provided us some additional renderings of what their proposal is going to look like. Now, the zoning ordinance mandates that the height of these buildings, including the facade, does not exceed 30 feet. Now, the proposed height of some of these facades will be 35 feet, so they need a 5-foot variance in order to continue through with this proposal. I'll turn it back over to the board for any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Evans. Before we have the petitioner come up, I do want to note that we did receive one additional letter from an adjoining property dated January 9th, who is opposed to this variance request. It appears to be the same letter from the 400 John R. Road LLC organization, just resent, unless I'm confused by missing something, but it's the same letter, isn't it? Yeah, okay. Just wanted to note that for the records. Is the applicant here? Please come forward. Good evening. As in the case before you, I know you both were present, or, well, you were present, anyway, last month. And if you'd like to run through your same presentation, feel free, or if you'd just like to add some additional information, that's fine too.
Well, if I may, I believe the board recalls the presentation that was made at the last meeting. In addition to the information that was provided at that meeting, we did have an opportunity to review the letters that were submitted by the adjacent property owner. It's my understanding that they submitted an additional letter because they received an additional public hearing notice due to the requirement for additional notice. But in both cases, and I can't speak for that respondent, but it appears that they're responding to the public hearing notice, which basically says to have a 35-foot high building where 30 foot is permitted. And I don't believe they've taken the opportunity to review the actual drawings and documents to see the extent of that. But in any case, I would note that our request is very similar, if not identical, to the entrance facade that they already have on their property. So we're not asking for anything that is would presumably dwarf their building as they've indicated in their letter. The other thing that has been responded to since the previous meeting was the reasoning behind the change in the ordinance. In a letter that I believe you have as part of your agenda, was indicated that the conflict between the drawing that was in the previous ordinance and the text that was in the previous ordinance, and as a matter to resolve that, they changed the text to match the drawing. A little bit simpler than what I thought it was in that case, and alluded to at the last meeting. But in any case, we're dealing with the current language of the ordinance, which does include the parapets in the definition of building height. If I can quickly, the special circumstances that exist on this site is the extreme depth of the front setback. It is something that in most cases, probably in most other developments in this zoning district, would fit in the front yard of this site. And that's where our buildings begin. We are trying to make improvements to the site, trying to add some architectural feature to it, and attract new tenants and keep existing tenants within the building. It certainly will have no negative impact to adjacent properties. Most of the adjacent properties have similar entrances already constructed on their sites. And with that, I'll be happy to answer any questions that the board might have.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Courtney.
Yes. If this were done, if this particular change were made prior to the last change of the ordinance, would it have not required a variance?
It's my opinion that if this proposed addition to the building was done prior to the adoption of the ordinance in 2011, it would not have required a variance.
Okay, that's what I thought, but I just wanted to make sure.
I don't know what the last change of the ordinance was, but the 2011 is when the new language came in.
2011 is what I'm. Thank you.
Mr. Lambert.
Mr. Steinmeck, how does the height variance that you're requesting compared to the Dick's Sporting Goods height to sign on their store?
The Dick's Sporting Goods, the top of their entranceway parapet is 32.8. We are asking for 35 feet. So it's 2 foot 4 inches in addition to the height that they have there.
Okay, thank you.
Any additional questions for the applicant? No? Thank you. Please have a seat. We may call you up in a few, but we do appreciate you coming forward. I'd like to open the public comment section of the meeting for this particular agenda item. Is there anyone who would like to speak on this matter? If so, please come forward. Seeing that no one has interest in speaking on it, I'm going to close the public hearing section. I'm going to bring this back before the board for discussion. Is there any thoughts on this particular matter from the board or questions for staff?
Mr. Nealon?
Yes.
I have a question for staff. At the last hearing last month, Mr. Stymick had indicated that if they put some type of mechanical equipment on the roof of the building, they would be allowed to put a parapet up there that would block the vision of that from the street level. Is that correct from your interpretation?
Presuming that the mechanical equipment is actually taller than the maximum height of 30 feet, I didn't research that. I can try to get an answer before we're done here tonight.
Yeah, if you could do that, appreciate
Sure.
that. Thanks.
Any additional comments or thoughts on this particular matter from the board? Mr. Clark and then Mr. Craig.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd just like to inquire, Mr. Evans, I think you did a pretty phenomenal job of kind of giving the nutshell discussion about the ordinance issue here. Could you just review that briefly for us again? Because once again, that was 30 days ago, and at my age, it's kind of hard to remember, so.
Well, what I can do is I've prepared a memo that was in the board packet. What I could do is read that.
Just the, and I'm just wanting you to kind of just give the 1 or 2 sentence synopsis.
Well, regarding the first, let's see here. The board requested at the last meeting information on building height variances for 400 John R. and 500 to 650 John R. Those are the 2 properties to the north of the subject site. A search of the variance files indicated that height variances were not granted for those sites. Now, the board also wanted information regarding height reductions in the new zoning ordinance, and I posed that question to the planning director, Brent Savedon, who sent me an email. And to summarize, the old zoning ordinance pre-2011 had conflicting information in regards to the text that addressed building height and a drawing that tried to illustrate building height. And specifically the definition, the text said that the height of a building with a flat roof shall be measured to the highest point of the roof surface, but the drawing indicated that the height for a building with a flat roof can be measured to the top of the parapet. So this discrepancy was addressed at the zoning ordinance rewrite in 2011, and the choice was made to measure building height to the top of the roof, not the top of the parapet, or excuse me, the top of the parapet, not the top of the roof.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Crunt.
I'm going to again refer to the our Zoning Board of Appeals handbook for insight and guidance, and again back to the standards of non-use and dimensional variances. And the special condition that I think applies to the situation, I'll just read it. It says special conditions or circumstances that are related to the property are generally physical characteristics that may normally include, and they list a whole bunch of things like narrowness, depth, shallowness of the property. And what I'm saying here is because we have an incredibly large setback, front setback of 670 feet, I find that to be a special, exceptional circumstance or condition, actually it's a condition that exists with this property. And I'm in favor of approving this for that reason alone, but in addition, I find that because our zoning ordinance changed in 2011 and the owners, the current owners of this property acquired it in 2007. When you normally purchase a property, you look at what the zoning requirements are, and you think those are the standards. And I realized there was open meetings to review the ordinance for the public, but generally a property owner, every time he gets a notification, will not necessarily sit in on these kind of meetings when hundreds of pages of that may or may not even apply to their situation. And I think, again, because they bought the property under the old ordinance and had no real knowledge that this was occurring, that the standard was changed by this 5 foot. And again, I don't want to base my argument for the variance on that, but I think it's another reason that I would be in favor of granting this variance, because when they bought, like I say, when they bought the property, it was fine to go to 35 feet. Now, 4 years later, it changes, and then they want to improve their property, and they say, no, you can't do it. I mean, it's kind of a raw spot. And I think I'll bring this up at the Planning Commission, see what we can't do to amend this, especially for properties with a setback of this kind of hundreds of feet compared to some of our properties are maybe only 40, 50 feet back, and I could see 5 feet may affect neighboring buildings. This certainly doesn't affect any neighboring buildings. So I would move to approve the variance.
Support.
Thank you, Mr. Krent. And I'd like to note that Mr. Krent's motion to approve was seconded by Board Member Eisenbacher. Is there any discussion on the motion to approve by the board?
Mr. Chairman?
Mr. Lambert?
Generally, I'm in agreement with Mr. Krent's argument, especially the fact that the property is set back that far. My concern with it is giving a variance which would allow them to build a parapet taller than the adjoining property, specifically with Dick's Sporting Goods. I could live with a variance that would give them the same height, but I am concerned about giving them a height greater than the adjoining property owners. So whether or not the board wants to amend it or not, I would just have a concern with going up higher than the nearby property owner.
Mr. Courtney?
Yes, I think they're so far apart and in different directions that the one, you wouldn't even recognize that which one is higher or lower. I don't feel it's necessary to limit them because of that.
Mr. Bloomingdale?
I agree with Mr. Courtney in that at the distance that this is being looked at, if you looked at it specifically to see whether one was higher than another, I doubt if you'd see it.
Any additional comments on this particular item, which is a motion to approve? Mr. Evans?
Yes, I don't have a comment, but just a response to Mr. Lambert's question.
Sure, please.
And I've put the applicable section of the zoning ordinance on the overhead, and it does allow structures, mechanical equipment, and their screening devices on the roof to not exceed by more than 10 feet the height limit of the district in which the use is located. So mechanical equipment and their screening structures could be up to 40 feet tall without a variance.
40. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Evans. That changes my vote then.
Any additional thoughts on this matter from the board?
Mr. Chairman?
Mr. Clerk?
Thank you. I kind of struggled with the same thing Mr. Lambert spoke on, and I do agree that they're not. It's not part of the same development. The two buildings are not adjoined in any nature. They are roughly close by, but I think that's kind of where the similarities end. And not that this is related to approving and/or reason for, but that corner of Troy, that south end of Troy, where I live, in this particular shopping center, really is looking old and dated. And there has been a renaissance both on the Madison Heights side and the Troy side of refreshed buildings or new buildings, and this was really kind of like the big anchor to that area. So I do think that the 35-foot limit is reasonable. And at the end of the day, I just find it very difficult, the person who wrote the letter in objection stating that this is going to obstruct in any way the other building. I don't think the representative from that company is here, but I drive by there every single day, and there's absolutely no way that this would be an obstruction. So I'll be voting in favor of the motion.
Any additional thoughts? Mr. Evans, could you please call the question on this particular matter?
Mr. Eisenbacher,
Yes.
Mr. Neal,
Yes.
Mr. Krent.
Yes.
Mr. Lambert,
Yes.
Mr. Bloomingdale,
Yes.
Mr. Clark,
Yes.
Mr. Courtney.
Yes.
Congratulations, you have your variance. Good luck. Mr. Evans, before we move into item 4C, I have a question for you. Tonight, when we reach the point of making a decision on this, it's a little different since we're not going to be approving a variance. We're going to be providing, and correct me if I'm wrong, guidance from the board to the city of whether this use fits within this existing zoning designation. I assume we're going to have a vote, right?
Well, yes, there would be a vote, and
How should we call it? It's not, we're not approving a variance.
no, it's an interpretation. What you're being asked to, and I'll allude to this more in the presentation, but you're being asked to interpret the use. What is the use? So you're not being asked to approve or disapprove whether the use is appropriate for the site, but based on the characteristics of the use and all the other information presented, not only at the last hearing but tonight, it's the board's job to determine what that use would be. Now, what's going to happen is the zoning administrator, city planning staff will take your determination of what the use is, plug it back into the zoning ordinance, and apply the applicable zoning ordinance standards to determine whether that use is applicable for this location. But that's part of staff's job after you make your interpretation as to what the use is.
Right. Thank you. Now, do you want to make the initial presentation, or do you want to turn it over to Mr. Miller?
No, I'll go ahead and make my standard presentation. We'll go through the same process that we did at the December meeting, with, of course, the difference being that the board can deliberate and render a determination.
Okay. Feel free to start when you'd like.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The subject property as printed in tonight's agenda is located at 4924 Rochester Road. To interpret whether the proposed principal use of a property constitutes a community center, a club, a place of worship, or some other use under the city's zoning ordinance. Now, the subject property is the former Marinelli's Restaurant on the east side of Rochester Road. That area is just south of Long Lake Road, and in the overhead behind the board, I've outlined the subject property in red. I've taken that aerial and overlaid in color zoning district classifications. The property in the purplish color, including the subject property, property to the north and also across the street on Rochester, and also property to the south up to Glacier is zoned neighborhood node. Now, property to the east of the subject property in yellow is zoned single family residential. And then property south of Glacier and also southeast across Rochester Road is zoned business classification. Now, in September, the city received a zoning approval request for a proposed community center. Now, based on floor plans and supporting documentation provided by the requester, city administration determined that the community center use was permitted. Well, since the determination, administration received information from Troy residents challenging the community center zoning determination. Thus, the city manager, acting as the zoning administrator, is requesting that this board, the Board of Appeals, interpret the proposed use. So to clarify, the board is being asked to interpret the use. The board is not being asked to review the city administration's determination, and the scope of the board's interpretation is limited solely to interpreting the proposed use. It's not to approve or disapprove the proposed use for the site. Once the board interprets the use, administration will use the zoning ordinance to determine applicable zoning standards.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Evans. One question to be clear just about the package we received, because last month's was lengthy, this month's was lengthy. Has there been an addition? I thought there were some additional correspondence from surrounding properties.
I provided additional correspondence in regards to board member questions from the last meeting.
Yeah, I thought there was one or and I may be wrong, but I thought there was one additional piece of communication from a resident. But I don't know if I'm right. I thought I went through this again today.
Well, what we've done, just so everyone on the board and the public is aware, is we've taken everything, all the documents that were in the December agenda, and anything that was new or different, we added on. So the board has everything that the board and the members of the public were able to see at the December meeting, and if there are any additional information added on, such as my notes and memos in regards to the board, to answer the board member questions, those were included and tacked on to the agenda packet. Some of the items that you received in paper copy from either the applicant or a member of the public, whether they physically brought to the meeting in December, I've scanned those and also included them here, so you had them fresh.
Thank you.
Plus the 2 additional paper hard copies.
Exactly.
Yeah, plus the additional hard copies that we received after the electronic agenda was presented and distributed, but before tonight's meeting, you have hard copies of those that were provided at the dais for each board member.
For clarification, this hard copy of the supplemental memorandum, it appears to be similar to the one, identical to the one we have. Is that correct? You said you received this.
Yes, the paper copy that you received was received today, and perhaps to clarify potential differences, I believe the writer of that is here
Okay.
representing the property owner.
Okay, well, when he has time to speak, he can clarify if he changed something. Okay, thank you. Before I bring up Mr. Miller, is there any questions for staff? Mr. Lambert?
Yes, the question now is for the Assistant City Attorney. In one of the responses to Mr. Evans' correspondence, I believe it was the Rochester Hills zoning administrator or planning director, the Religious Land Use and Institutional Persons Act was cited as one reason why they tend to address this question a little differently than Troy. Has your office or Mrs. Bloom looked at this issue in light of that federal law?
I think you're referring to what's commonly known as RIOPA law, and no, we have not taken a look at the federal law as how it would affect this particular interpretation that you're being asked to do.
Thank you.
Any additional questions for staff by the board?
Yes.
Mr. Bloomingdale?
Again, to the city attorney. If I understand correctly, then the memorandum you sent to us on November 19th is valid and the one we should be using.
Yes,
Thank you.
yes.
I apologize, Mr. Evans, but I do have one more question for you. The very large packet that we received that apparently is opposed to this use, that starts around page 210, I believe. No, excuse me. It starts
Right around page 205.
205.
Yeah, public comment 2 in the book.
I'm just curious, one item, do we know who submitted this, or is it, it's unclear to me. I know we have an email address and such, but it's been not clear to me. And
Well, I think we need to let the comment reflect on its face as to who submitted it. Certainly, if that individual is here today, the board could ask if
sure,
that person is here to identify themselves, but the information we received in regards to the public comment that was sent via email with the cover email that was sent to me is the information that the city received, so I included the cover email plus their attachment as one of the public comments.
right, and we know of this person as Tim, right?
Well, the cover email does say Tim.
Yeah. That's fine. I just want in the records that this is a little atypical in that we have this information, but it didn't come in a manner where they're identifying themselves.
Well,
And that's fine, but I just want it to be known.
I would opine that in order to take advantage of the ability today to receive messages electronically so people can get information or comments to the board. Maybe they can't attend a meeting,
Sure.
so they can take advantage of that. That could be perceived as one unintended consequence, is that rather than have somebody come up to the podium and state their name, address for their comments, we receive messages that or comments that may or may not be entirely clear 100% as to their source.
Understand.
But the board does have the ability to grant whatever weight for any public comment that's received tonight, whatever weight they deem is appropriate for the request that's being made in the task at hand.
Thank you. Mr. Miller, how are you today?
Good evening, Chairman and members of the ZBA. My name is Mark Miller, and I am the Director of Economic and Community Development for the City of Troy. My address is 500 West Big Beaver, Troy City Hall. I'm here kind of to answer the question, why are we here? We're here, one, for an interpretation of the zoning ordinance. And specifically, what is the use classified? In 2001, we adopted a comprehensive revision of our zoning ordinance. In that, we had taken into consideration the Zoning Enabling Act and its amendments, and also current case law, so that the section regarding the duties and powers of the ZBA is current and modernized. And in that ordinance, we created a position called the zoning administrator, which was not in the older zoning ordinance versions. And basically, the zoning administrator is designated as the city manager. And day to day, they pass that down, the duty down to me, and I pass it down to Brent Savinat, the planning director, along with Paul Evans. Now, Brent and Paul contact me all the time, and when the Adam Community Center came to them, we were totally in the loop about this request, and we actually knew about it sometime before the application was even submitted. Now, we had significant dialogue with Dr. Amin, at least 7 different interactions, meeting in public and through emails where we sought clarification so that we could determine what the use was, whether or not initially it was a community center. The city manager was kept in the loop during all of these discussions, and on October 2nd of 2013, I wrote an email acting as a zoning administrator that determined that the Adam Community Center was a community center and that they may have accessory or secondary use of prayers. So in other words, it was not a place of worship. The city manager and city council then continued to receive considerable amount of public comment, some of it factual, some of it not. And that comment was significant in that it suggested that it was a place of worship, and it created some ambiguity. Our team, Paul Evans, Brent Savinat, myself, and the city manager, Brian Kitchener, got back together and jointly made the decision, which the city manager wrote a letter reversing the zoning administrator's decision in the sense that we were going to request an interpretation from the ZBA in your existing, through your duties and your powers. And the reason why we did that is that it would provide the decision in an open environment, transparency, and the decision would be decided in the public realm, and there would be finality to it. With that, I know you have a difficult decision and have to do some deliberation. I'm here to answer any questions that you have. And the one thing I did note in the way that you acted last week, that this is an unusual circumstance. Even though I'm acting as the applicant, really there's a private property owner who is really impacted by this, and you granted him just almost rights as the applicant to speak before you. I just want to identify, I thought that was a great gesture on your part because it does impact that property owner. I'm here to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Miller. Well, Mr. Courtney, I think you were first.
The original decision that it was a community center, where in the ordinance is there anything that is a community center?
There is not a definition of a community center, but I will tell you that the primary reason that we made that determination, or I should say we didn't make the determination that it was a place of worship, because on the floor plans which were submitted to us, there were no areas designated for specific religious activities.
I'm not,
Okay.
that's secondary right now. I'm interested in how we got a definition of community center. We have a community center in Troy, and I'm not sure that this would relate to that at all. Are we saying that a VFW hall is a community center?
That's not what I'm saying. Maybe I can answer that
is that
more
a-
specifically. There is a use specifically identified in the zoning ordinance, community center, but it is not specifically defined. So we, at staff, had to make the determination, would this be commonly be accepted as a community center? Not every single land use has a definition.
Okay, I didn't find the community center at all. This may not be the good time to tell me, but can you eventually tell me where it's at in the ordinance?
Yes.
Thank you.
One question, Mr. Miller, is it, answer this as you'd like, but is it possible we also latched onto the term because it's the term used by the interested party?
Yes,
They call
clearly,
it as community center.
clearly.
Okay, that makes, logically, it makes sense of how we got there, but, okay, thank you. Mr. Bloomingdale?
Mr. Chairman, thank you. We've received a letter here tonight from the law offices of Thomas R. Walecki, stating that the determination that it was a community center was never revoked. And I believe you just said that it was.
Yes, there was a letter which the city manager signed and sent to the applicant informing them of that.
Okay, so this document where that statement is made then is an error, is that?
Well, I've never seen that document, but I can tell you that we did notify the property owner that we were seeking a interpretation, reversing what the original determination was.
Thank you.
And Mr. Evans, that should be in the packet. I know it's huge.
Yes.
Well, actually, it came
It is in
today.
the packet, yeah.
No, I meant the letter from the city manager acting.
Oh, yes, it is.
And
it is.
reversing the determination and stating that we would seek the interpretation from the ZBA.
Right, it's,
Oh, right there.
I put it on the overhead, October 28th, the city manager wrote a letter advising the property owner that they're going to request that the board take this, consider this interpretation.
Question for, if you would, Mr. Miller, I'm sure we have more questions for you, but because of this matter came up, and I think judiciously quick for me to interject or ask a question of staff. Ms. Dufresne, and you can follow up with an answer on this maybe later in the evening, but the document that Mr. Bloomingdale references and the argument posed in it, because it's of a, I guess, of a legal nature, your thoughts on it that you can opine on perhaps later after if you've reviewed it. Sorry to put it in front of you so. If you could have some thoughts or guidance, would be interested to know, because considering in light of the letter that was delivered by the city in October, plus the meeting in December, to get this item now, I'll call it out of kind of left field, but I'm not it's outside of my area of expertise, so I'm not sure how to handle it. So if you want to get back to me on that, feel free. But that's kind of a question I have. Regarding additional questions from Mr. Miller, is there anyone, Mr. Lambert?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. The original email or message we got, or memo we got from Ms. Dufresne, and I think I've seen this repeated several times, is it says, we have to decide whether the proposed use is a place of worship, a club, or some other use under the city zoning ordinance. What are the other options open to us besides club, place of worship, or some other use?
Well, it would be anything else that's in the definition section of the zoning ordinance. I didn't want to limit you to just the obvious choices. If this board, after deliberating and after hearing all of the evidence, decided that maybe it was something else. So there are, the zoning ordinance contains a number of definitions. You can draw from any one of those that you feel is appropriate, or the board feels is appropriate.
Thank you. And then one follow-up, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Miller, maybe that would help the board and the people that are watching this meeting. how does the city define, for example, the Boys and Girls Club? Is that defined as a club or a community center, or how do they define that?
You're referring to the property of John R.?
Yes, yeah,
Yes,
the
John R.
Boys and Girls Club of Troy.
John R. Lake.
To answer that question factually, I would like to look at the file, because I don't know off the top of my head. I know in retrospect, we did file and say that this was a generally accepted community center. We have looked at the definition for a club, which requires membership. So, I don't want to lead you in that direction, but that might be some valid questions to ask the applicant. Do you have membership, and would it fit under a club? I don't think it fits under like a fraternal organization or something like that.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Hold on, Mr. Miller, again. Well, I will say Mr. Clark is far more knowledgeable about Robert's Rules of Orders than I probably ever will be, and I know we're kind of sometimes some leeway here, but I think in the interest of just moving forward with a unique subject, I do have a question for staff, so if you bear with me while I ask it, because Mr. Lambert's question brings up a question for me. The term community center, which is used by the user and is somewhere discussed or referenced as a term in the zoning ordinance, but not defined, leaves me with the question saying, are we open to, in our interpretation tonight, of going beyond the defined terms? In other words, if we're going to introduce community center and say it's a community center, even though we reference it somewhere, but we don't call out what a community center is. For example, can we, I hate to put it this way, invent terms like worship center, you name it, I'll just say XYZ center. I mean, do we have latitude tonight to make that as part of a determination, or are we tied in close to those definitions?
Well, Mr. Chair, I'd like to give a partial answer and then defer to the city attorney if there's anything she might want to add. In the practice of zoning administration, based on case law and history, not only in Troy and in Michigan, but throughout the United States, if you have a comprehensive land use ordinance, only in extreme limited circumstances, and I can't think of any off the top of my head, can a use be disallowed. Now, Troy's zoning ordinance is over 300 pages. It's a very comprehensive document. But if you took a smaller community that might not have quite an extensive document, just because a particular land use isn't defined or particularly stated, does not insinuate necessarily that land use is not allowed within the city or the community. So one legal tenet of zoning administration is that you have to try to fit all uses in somewhere, even though it might not necessarily be a hand in glove. There's no ordinance that I'm aware of that can reasonably anticipate any possible use that could come up. A good example of that might be technology changes, that uses that were not even contemplated some years ago now are being requested here in Troy or any other community. So with that legal framework, perhaps that gives the board some guidance as to when we do zoning administration, it's our job to try to find somewhere where that use fits in. And once we find out where the use fits in, then determine if it's appropriate for the property based on other factors listed in the zoning ordinance. Did you?
Yeah, if I could add one comment, and it may be helpful as you give your answer, Ms. Dufresne, is I guess what I'm concerned about is, I guess my question is a little different, Paul, as I was wondering, is that if we reach the point of saying that we think it's an XYZ center, just to say it like that, if we make a determination like that, what's the follow-up later on? Are we forced now to make a change to the zoning ordinance? Because we've just created something. Do we have to do, I'm wondering about the ramifications. I'm trying to understand, it's not really so much even a decision as to what goes on for these people that we help them out with tonight. It's what can of worms did we open up? And as the chairperson, I just want to understand is if we create a term, do we have to then get the ordinance changed to now cover it? You know what I mean? That's really what I'm getting at.
Go ahead.
And I'm done.
And the city attorney will comment after I do. But one thing I did think of is it would make staff's job easier and provide more clarity if indeed the board opined that the use was analogous or constituted a use listed, because for many uses within the city code, for example, places of worship, there's development standards, certain required setbacks exclusively for places of worship, and we have that for many different uses in the ordinance. So if the board does opine that the use, whatever the use is, the closer it at least is linked to some of the terms in the zoning ordinance, that'll make it easier for staff to respond to the applicant to give them an answer as to whether the use is appropriate for the site.
You have anything to add?
Mr. Chair, let me answer the second question first.
Okay.
If you look at Article 15, Section D of the Zoning Board of Zoning Ordinance, it talks about interpretation. Number 1 gives you the guidelines about interpretation, and number 2 talks about the Zoning Board of Appeals may request the Planning Commission to initiate an ordinance amendment that would correct or clarify the ordinance. So if this board determines that, and I would strongly caution against inventing anything. I think that was your word. If this board believes that it's unable to fulfill the interpretation request, you could ask the Planning Commission to take a look at the ordinance and request a clarification. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does. I guess the other procedural thing is that and I agree with you, I don't like to, I think that's a good word, invent something here on the fly. But if that happened, so I think the board understands it, that would delay reaching a resolution for the public's interest here tonight, right? We wouldn't be able to function, right?
Who wouldn't be?
The board. We couldn't render an opinion until the planning. Is that right? Am I understanding that right? In other words, we would have to wait till planning came up with their.
Well, I think there's enough framework in the zoning ordinance for you to reach an interpretation on this particular issue. But yes, I guess in essence, if you were to come to the conclusion that you didn't have the right tools provided in the zoning ordinance, then yes.
Okay. All right. I appreciate the help and the guidance there. Mr. Evans, anything to add?
No.
No? Okay. Thank you for your patience, Mr. Miller. Is there any additional questions for Mr. Miller before Mr. Courtney?
Yes, the last conversation brings up question. If we determine it's a community center, do we have enough zoning ordinance definition to determine whether they do or don't fit that particular parcel?
They would fit that parcel, yes.
They would?
Yes. If they continue under the scope and scale as submitted in the floor plans and making our determination.
Okay. So even though there's only a vague comment, that's enough that you can decide what setbacks and
Correct. My understanding is that they would meet all setbacks. And I can be frank, is that the issue came up with the planning director when in the initial conversations, that if this was a place of worship, there would be a 50-foot required setback, which the existing building would not meet. Okay. So then so from a practical standpoint, the planning director was trying to work with the landowner, so he knew how to deal with it. If it was a community center, there was not any difficulties with setback, but if it was a place of worship, there was a 50-foot setback for an existing building. So then they might have been here seeking a variance request if it was determined it was a place of worship. So that's kind of like when you make a determination, it can click other things. And I don't want to be definitive, because if we haven't done a complete review of it if it's considered a place of worship.
So if we determine it's a community center, they don't need to come back, as far as at this point, they don't need to come back for a variance.
To my knowledge, at this time, yes. I'm
determined that it's basically a church, they can come back and file and come in and ask for a variance.
Yes, because the existing building doesn't meet the minimum 50-foot setback from neighboring property.
So they could be in the same location regardless of what we determine they are. It's just a matter of how they do it.
Correct, but I mean, honestly, in working in zoning for many years, if you have to seek a variance, there's no guarantee.
Well, yes.
Mr. Bloomingdale, you had a question?
A comment, Mr. Chairman. I would like your permission to read a statement in this letter prior to public comment,
Right, okay, you mind if we hold on to that
if you allow me to read it before public comment starts.
before public comment? Yes, do you mind if we
Yes, no, sir.
hold it until after Mr. Miller is out of the hot seat, so to speak?
Mr. Chair, I just would like to make one comment. I mean, RLUIPA was mentioned earlier, and I'm very familiar with that. RLUIPA a lot of times is used as that places of worship use that to permit them to be at this location. By no means were we saying that they wouldn't be permitted as a place of worship. The issue is the setback problem.
Right.
I understand.
It's a permitted use in that zoning district.
Question, when did they purchase the property?
I don't know exactly.
Did you know if though that occurred after they began discussion with the city about their use, or did they buy the property before? And,
I don't want to give a wrong answer. I do know that early in the process, Dr. Amin did have discussions with the planning department. Now, I'm not sure if he started those discussions in his purchase process, because he may have had, I don't know. I mean, if I was buying property, I would have a purchase agreement and allow myself to have some due diligence. I'm not aware of their process.
you bring up a point, and again, for me, it's a little bit of a procedural issue, is that I think there is some possibility for questions that come up tonight that we'll want to ask some party. And you are presenting, but I'm not, for example, I know Mr. Amin's attorney is in the audience. Last time we granted him more time to talk. I'm not going to create a situation where we create a block of time in public comment. But in the interest of us getting the information we need and getting the best decision, I'm wondering if the gentleman should be present next to you. Or is, my question for staff is that irregular to have another representative for the organization appear with Mr. Miller? Because I have some questions that I don't think Mr. Miller can speak to. So, but I can't, but I don't know how to ask him in public comment, right?
Well, if you can ask members of the public
During public comment?
during public comment, if to clarify something, or if they have perhaps factual information about a neighborhood or an area that could be relevant to.
And that would be outside the time limit?
If the board determines that it's an important question that should be asked, certainly you can make exceptions wherever necessary in order to garner whatever information is important to the board to reach your conclusion.
Okay, I guess that's how we'll proceed then. Okay, all right. I'll probably revisit that later. Any additional questions for Mr. Miller? No? Mr. Krent, I was wondering, he mentioned something, Mr. Miller mentioned something about possibly some discussions with planning. Do you recall anything that might have come up when you
Nothing
were?
came before the planning commission regarding this determination.
Okay, all right. Any final comments, Mr. Miller, before we let you sit down?
The only thing is, I think I was referring to the planning department.
Oh, okay,
Planning
sure.
commission.
Understand. All right,
Thank you very much.
thank you. Before I open the public comment section, is there any additional questions for staff? Okay. Mr. Bloomingdale, you mentioned that you wanted to read something. Do you want this part or this document you want to read, do you want that before public comment?
Please,
Okay, you may.
because it pertains to public comment.
Sure.
I'm reading from the same statement from the law offices of Thomas R. Walecki. And he makes a comment that I agree with that I would like to share with the people sitting in the audience. The issue is not about whether Muslims should have a place to worship. Although many well-meaning people, Muslim, Christian, and of other faiths, spoke at the meeting prior, indicating their belief that Muslims in the city of Troy should have the right to worship. That is not the issue, and their comments, although well-intended, are not germane. As I read that, I realized in the notes that I took on the public speaking from last meeting, there were a lot of very articulate people who expressed their desire to have a place to meet. This gentleman expresses it better than I can, and I will encourage you to try to help us understand how to define this particular building. I think that's our mission, that's our charge. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Bloomingdale. I'm going to open up the public comment section of the meeting. I'm going to request, if possible, I normally don't ask for any order to be followed, but if the attorney representing Adam is here, I'd like him to go first. Could you come forward, sir?
Mr. Chairman, is there going to be a motion to give him extra time?
I really want to... It is my intent that I have one particular question. I think I have to ask him because there's probably no one else in the room that can answer it unless Dr. Amin is here. Is he here?
Yes.
Okay. And I'm not sure how to answer that question because you see, I've never asked an applicant or a member of the public during public comment. And since they aren't the applicants, I'm a little bit lost as how best to proceed. So I don't want to go down the road of making a motion, and we have a lot of people I know want to talk. I want to make sure that we kind of hold to that 3-minute max window. But for me, I have one particular question I think is germane to getting this resolved tonight. Let me ask this of the board. If the board doesn't have any latitude, would they allow me to ask the attorney or Mr. Amin one question in particular, allow that question to be answered, and then we could turn it back into a standard 3-minute time frame? Mr. Courtney.
I don't think questions from the board should be counted against somebody's time limit.
Right.
Okay. So if we let him have 3
Because
minutes to talk?
If I don't like what he's going to say, I'm going to ask him questions that'll cut his time out. No.
I understand.
I think it should be your question answered, has nothing to do with his time.
Okay. Well, in that case, what about we proceed with this argument or this motive is we give him the speaker 3 minutes, and then if we have questions, board members ask those questions which are not time limited, and then we're done, we move on to the next speaker. How's that? Does that all make sense? Okay.
Good.
I see nodding of heads. Mr. Evans.
And you had mentioned that there'd be a 3-minute limit, just for the benefit of everyone, the public speaking. To the right of the chairman, Mr. Chair, if you could point to the, that has some lights on it. Once the timer starts, at the 1-minute mark, a different light will light up, and when the 3 minutes are expired, you'll hear a tone, and that will indicate that the 3 minutes has expired.
Thank you. Sir.
Before we begin, I was going to ask the board if I may have even just 5 minutes, because I think it may be beneficial to explain to members who are residents who are present today, who might not have been present at the last meeting, exactly what's going on. It may help to smooth this over, and that's why I would request additional time. 3 minutes is going to be awfully tight to essentially reiterate what was done last month. I wasn't going to do that, but given the fact that I see new faces in the chambers here, I thought that it might be worthwhile to give that sort of presentation again to maybe head off potential arguments or objections.
Okay. Are there any objections to giving the speaker 5 minutes? Do we have a motion in support or?
I move that he be given 5 minutes.
5 minutes and
Support.
support. Okay, Mr. Evans, can you quickly call the
Yes.
vote?
Mr. Neal?
Yes.
Mr. Krent?
Yes.
Mr. Lambert?
Yes.
Mr. Bloomingdale?
Yes.
Mr. Clark?
Yes.
Mr. Courtney?
Yes.
Mr. Eisenbacher?
Yes.
And who seconded that?
Mr. Courtney. Mr.
Courtney. Thank you.
Bloomingdale put the motion. Go ahead, sir.
Good evening. I'm Tom Walkley, attorney for Adam Community Center. We were here in December, and I'm going to give a shortened version of the presentation that was done at that time. The history of this is that the Marinelli's restaurant was closed. Adam sought an application, or filed an application to use it as a community center. There was some question, there was exchange of documents back and forth, and ultimately it was approved. And in particular, the city stated that the floor plan is consistent with community center as the principal main use of the site. And importantly, the city said that the Adam Community Center is not a place of worship. And now that decision of the city was not appealed, and I believe that's actually what I said in the supplemental memorandum today. I want to make sure that I'm clear about that. I did not mean to imply that it was never revoked, but I said that it was not appealed. Nevertheless, also, if you look at the letter when the city kind of did what is a soft, I call a soft stop work order, they never actually said that they've revoked their decision, I believe. If I'm mistaken, I apologize. Nevertheless, there was an approval, and based upon that approval, Adam expended a great deal of money and time acquiring the building and doing the demo work, the renovation, beginning it, architectural drawings. They spent about $165,000 in reliance upon that approval. Then the city sent a letter saying, hold off, we're going to seek an interpretation. The opposition, I think, is in part based on some speculation, maybe well-intentioned speculation, but speculation nonetheless. The applicant, or Adam, has said that they are going to use this as a community center, not as a place of worship. They were approved as a community center, not as a place of worship. The opposition is essentially saying that we really think they're going to be a place of worship. They're going to operate as a mosque, even though they say they're going to be a community center. I think all of the documents that have been submitted by Adam, including the drawings, the architectural drawings, the other information, indicate that this will be a place of assembly, a community center, a cultural center. You heard many people speak at the last meeting indicating how they wanted to preserve culture, how they wanted social activities. Will there be some incidental prayer there? I think that was addressed previously as well. There will be incidental prayer. If Muslims adhere to the 5 times a day daily prayer regimen, that's going to take place anywhere, whether they're at work or not. You heard people speak last meeting indicating that they pray when they're working at Ford Motor Company or General Motors, and there's a place for them to do that. No different here. There's going to be incidental prayer, but it is not going to be large congregational prayer, organized services like that. That is not the intent. That's not the primary purpose. I would also say that this use is consistent with the zoning, the uses permitted in that zoning district. The zoning district is neighborhood node L, and it permits office, institutional, retail, service. The services and activities that will take place at Adam Community Center are teaching, educational, social gatherings, educational and cultural discussions and such. There will be no call to prayer, and there will be no organized congregational worship on a large scale. I would also indicate that there's not going to be any impact on the surrounding area. In fact, there will be less impact on the surrounding area than there was with the Marinelli's restaurant. There's not going to be late hours of operation. There's no alcohol that will be served. There will be less traffic. It will certainly not increase the traffic in this area late at night, et cetera. I think one of the important things to point out is that some of the opposition, some of the documents that were submitted last time by Ms. Dawley, I believe, from Rochester Hills, are maybe not misleading, but they kind of move towards that area by indicating that by superimposing documents, doctoring up photographs, and trying to imply that that is going to be the use here. No doubt that Adam had a website. They did try to acquire a church property in Troy several years ago now. I believe it's almost 5 years ago. They put together a website to try and acquire donations to purchase that property. They didn't do it. Unfortunately, they never updated the website. So I guess the bottom line is that the incidental prayer, not the primary purpose. It is not a place of worship. It will be used more as a cultural society. And finally, I just last week attended a client's birthday party at the Carpathia Club in Sterling Heights, Michigan. And it's basically the same thing as what is proposed here by Adam. It's for people of German heritage, and they have cultural activities, dancing, soccer teams, etc., and it's social gatherings. That's primarily what this will be used for, and charitable organizations. They are a charitable group intending to do good works. I think I've come in within the time limit.
Your time limit.
Did you have questions?
Yeah, I do. And for me, this kind of gets right to the crux of the issue. I think this question or the being able to resolve this might close out some of the questions of people who have concerns about this. Is it comes with some paperwork issues. For me, I know last month you referenced the 2009 filing, which for board members I reference is page 273 through 275 of our packet. And that use varies based on some filings to different Michigan and IRS departments in 2010, 2013, I think maybe 2011. Some of that information comes from packages by this other source who has concerns and who haven't really identified themselves. And I understand why your definition may have changed over the years because of your intent to operate in a different way in a different property, different location. Is it possible that if we're able to come to an answer that is supportive, and I'm not speaking for the board here, but if we come up with an answer that is to the liking of Adam, that in the future their filings will be able to identify themselves more as a 2009 filing versus 2014?
Absolutely.
I mean, I want to make sure one thing is I don't want to touch on anything that hurts anybody's tax exempt status or anything like that. But when you look at these documents, and I think I can see some well-meaning people see the term mosque, and then they say, well, look. And I can see why maybe they got excited, thinking that we have the wrong type of property and maybe too small of a property, or, you know, their feelings. And it just seems to me that ambiguity could be cleared up if in the future your paperwork was more akin to the operational aspects of Adam. And that's my question.
And you're absolutely correct. I did not work with Adam at the time of those filings, and I have advised them going forward in the future it needs to more accurately describe what they're doing now. At the time they formed, that was part of their purpose. They did intend to become a place of worship and operate a community center. There was a two-prong, as I explained at the last meeting. They were not able to do that because they frankly didn't have the funds. They could not acquire the properties, so they decided we're not going to do that. But what we can do is to go forward on the cultural, charitable side, and that's what we want to do. Those are the good works we want to perform. So that's what this is geared to. I would agree that the filings are misleading as to how they're operating today, and I would recommend to my client that those be cleared up in the future. Absolutely.
Okay. Thank you, sir. Before this gentleman sits down, is there any additional questions from the board?
Yes.
Mr. Eisenbacher.
Yeah, I didn't want to do any interpreting, so I went to the State of Michigan document server, and I looked up these documents, the same one that you had provided from 2009, read through it, and the 2009 initial filing matched what you said, but then I see that they filed their first, the first articles of incorporation were filed in December of 2009. Then in 2010, the statement filed with the State of Michigan states that the intent of the organization is a 501c3 nonprofit mosque, as was stated. 2011, the statement did not include a statement of purpose. 2012, the nonprofit corporation filing with the State of Michigan listed the purpose of the Adam Community Center as an Islamic center for practice of Islamic religion and prayer place. And that's a quote. And then in 2013, the nonprofit corporation filing with the State of Michigan lists the purpose as a place of worship and each of these documents are signed as submitted without fraudulent intent. So I'm struggling with your statement in your opinion as to, you're saying, okay, their intent is just a community center, but all the filings except for one with the state of Michigan for their tax status are as a place of worship. And there's a big split there.
Correct. A couple of responses to that. One, I would say that there's just inertia. Once you file in one direction, those are, I believe, prepared by a CPA, if I'm not mistaken.
The secretary.
Secretary, yeah, he's a CPA, and I think he does the taxes as well, or the other filings for them. And I think that sometimes just gets the ball rolling. I do a fair amount of business work, and you often find those annual reports. Those are annual reports that are filed, and they're often mistaken. I don't want to say they're fraudulent or misleading, but they're not the full story. And that's, I think, what's happening here. That does not indicate what they're doing with this property, what their intent is with this property. I think it's a holdover from how they started and how they wanted to be. And as I indicated in the last meeting, they are going to continue to raise funds and try and find a property of their own. But they can't do it at this location. That's not its intent. That's not its purpose. It's not suitable for that. It's not the proper shape, size, dimensions, et cetera. And most, I believe, everybody will continue to worship at other mosque in the area, IAGD, which is up on Auburn Road in Rochester Hills, et cetera.
Okay, that leads right into my next question. In reading the information, the hundreds of pages, and reading other research, trying to get an understanding, one thing that didn't come across, and what you stated in your letter is, in your letter it says, its primary use will not be as a place of worship. The members of the Adam Community Center will continue to attend regular religious services at other mosques. In none of this information does it say what school of Islam or what denomination of Islam is, what is the denomination of Adam, and does it match with the other mosques in the area?
I think I can let Dr. Amin speak to all of those issues, and perhaps some other people in the audience tonight that could give you far more detail on that than I could. I wouldn't want to misspeak on that.
Understand. Mr. Eisenbacher, do you have more?
The last one is that, again, in the federal tax filing, so we had several filings with the state, and then the federal tax filing also was stated as a church once again, as for establishing the tax status of the property. So, I mean, it's hard to see.
That is correct, and that's unfortunately how they set it up. That use does not match how they originally set up the company, the entity.
Anything further, Mr.? Okay. Mr. Bloomingdale.
Yes, sir. For reasons of comparison, would you care to state what activities were you observed or aware of at the Carpathia Club, the entity that you used as an example?
I'd love to. I mean, if you remember last month, there were several people who got up and spoke about how, their kids they came from another country, but their children were born and raised here. And they wanted their children to still be knowledgeable about their culture and their customs and history. And that's one of the things they wanted done at this center. At the Carpathia Club, I can show you on my cell phone, I actually took pictures in the hallway of the photographs of various ladies in dancing costumes from 1955 going forward, men in their soccer uniforms going forward, gatherings, social activities, and classes. And in fact, I have something attached to my supplemental memoranda here today that addresses some of those same issues. And then I didn't attach, but there was also a flyer for classes on learning to speak English 1, 2, 3, and 4, and finances and things like that. So those are all, educational, cultural, social activities that are precisely what Adam is intending to do right here. And I think to go a little further than the Carpathia Club, the Adam Community Center is set up to do charitable good works. And Dr. Amin will speak far more eloquently about it than I can. But that is that is their goal. I mean, and I think they've spoken to Mr. Miller and others about it at quite a bit of length as well.
I believe now what I've heard, that the activities involved were the preservation of culture, sports, and learning to speak the native language or the apparent language.
The current country language or the language of your prior country, yes. I mean,
So is that a fair summary then of what I just stated? Is that a fair summary?
at the Carpathia Club, yes, and social activities and gatherings, weddings, et cetera, things like that. In addition, though, again, the Adam Community Center will be doing community works. They also have regular speakers come in on scholarly subjects. I think we've presented materials on that as well. So it goes beyond just those the aspects of the Carpathia Club. There's actually more involved.
Understood, and thank you.
Mr. Clark.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think that the gentleman stated his position quite eloquently here tonight, but it still begs the question, the conflicting comments you made about where they were 5 years ago, trying to acquire a house of worship, land for, or a building for house of worship. That's not, I don't think, really germane to where we are here now, but, I am looking at the 2013 filing with their organization with the State of Michigan Department of Licensing and Regulatory Affairs, which I'm quite familiar with. And once again, it states right there, worship place as the primary, use of purpose of the organization. So 2013 wasn't 5 years ago. It was like 5 days ago, or maybe a few more. But the fact is that, I guess I just want to inquire of you is that, were you involved with this client 5 years ago when they were filing all these statements? Okay, you weren't. And then, of course, because of these statements, we now have a crisis manager who is an attorney in front of us here tonight. Is that pretty fair to say? Or I'm trying to, because, I think the public in the city of Troy, which we represent, we don't represent the city, we represent the public, they would be very disturbed if a business is filing with the IRS and the state of Michigan that they sell ice cream when in fact they're selling petroleum and they're a gas station, or they're an assembly plant when they claim to be a pizzeria. Because of safety issues, traffic issues, all those areas. At what point in time should we say, regardless of where this organization, and as to Mr. Eisenbacher's comment, had filed with the government, various government agencies, state and federal, saying that these weren't fraudulent documents, we are now to say, well, that was then, this is now. They were trying to do two different things, but as of really just, days ago, they were, the main purpose was worshiping. And I don't find any problem with people who want to worship. I believe that it's obviously a right for them here in this country. But the fact is, you can't walk away from these government filings and statements.
No, and I can respond. First of all, no, not a crisis manager. I've dealt with Dr. Amin for a couple of years on other matters, other business matters. He had consulted with me without disclosing any client confidences. I had been discussing things with him long prior to any of this being presented by Tim Farrison, I believe, and I don't believe Mr. Farrison wrote it. It was Ms. Cawley or Dolly from Rochester Hills who presented the information to him. That is what we've been informed. I'm not entirely sure. I shouldn't have, maybe said it that way. But it's my understanding, based upon comments from my client, that that's not where this came from, or that's where that came from. With respect to the place of worship, the filings indicating that they're a worship group, I think one of the responses is that's clearly their intent going forward. They want to obtain property to find a place of worship, a place of their own. It's not this building. And it's similar to what I indicated in the last meeting. You could have a church who can, or a religious organization, go out and buy another piece of property and operate something differently there. It doesn't make it a place of worship. That's the critical question here. Is there going to be regular assembly of individuals for organized congregational religious services? And there's not. So I think the answer to your question is, clearly these things should be cleared up until they begin operating as a church or a religious organization. That should mirror what they're doing. But in the meantime, I don't think it's determinative, because their their use of this property is not as a place of worship. So you can have a church or a religious organization buy other property. It doesn't make it a place of worship. That's my response.
Mr. Clark, anything to follow up, or? Okay, Mr. Courtney.
Yeah, I'm more interested in, if we determine you're a church, you realize you can file with the ZBA for a variance if you don't meet all of the requirements.
Yes, and I have, my client is aware of that.
That way you don't have to change your filing with the Fed or the state.
And I understand, and that's something we'll have to analyze as to whether or not
If that occurs.
Right.
Okay.
Mr. Bloomingdale.
If I hear you correctly, you're saying that this is not a principal place of worship. Is that correct?
That is correct.
There will be incidental prayers, et cetera, performed there.
Yes, and those same prayers, is my understanding, and Dr. Mean can probably speak to it more clearly than I can, but those prayers would take place regardless of where they were.
Agreed.
Okay, so that's what that is. I guess I might also add that plenty of organizations that are not places of worship begin their meetings with prayer, silent prayer. My assistant is very active in her community with city council meetings, and they begin each one with a moment of silent prayer. So,
Mr. Lambert.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. One of the questions I asked Mr. Miller was trying to get a definition for what the alternatives are, and had to do with being a club. And I might ask Mr. Amin a similar question, but are you involved in the drafting of bylaws, or are you aware of bylaws that establish any kind of membership status for people who will be using this facility?
I am not aware of bylaws at this time, but to the extent that there would be a club and membership required, that would probably be a good idea, and I've brought it up briefly with my client, again, without disclosing client confidence.
Thank you.
But I would say, I guess your question moves into the area of what are the analogous uses? I mean, what really, to argue by analogy as suggested by Mr. Evans and Mr. Frayne, what really is this? I mean, if it's not a place of worship, which is what the city clearly and unequivocally found, it's not a place of worship, then what is it? Is it a place of assembly? Is it a club? Is it simply an office? Does it match the office retail service use classifications? And all of those classifications, and including a place of worship, are permitted in that neighborhood node L. But I think these uses, the uses that I spoke of, are closer to what Adam is doing than place of worship. It's just not a place of worship.
Any additional questions for the gentleman? No? Mr. Clark, do you have one?
I don't have an additional question for this gentleman at the time, but I would like to make a comment to the board that,
Sure.
You know, it's almost 9:15. There's some, looks like school-aged children here who may be interested in speaking during public comment. So I think perhaps after the many voices of our community are heard, there might be further questions. But I think that somebody who charges by the hour is different than a member of the general public. And I'm sure he'd be happy to stay on behalf of his client. So if it's possible, if we can move to public comment, would be my suggestion.
No problem. Thank you for your time, sir.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. At this point, we're going to continue on with the public comment. Who would like to speak on this matter, please come up to the microphone. But I'll also extend it to Dr. Amin if he would like to come first. It's up to you, or anyone else for that matter. Don't be shy. We just ask you to state your name, address if you live nearby, what your relation to the property is.
Hey, good evening. My name is Ruth Ann Dolly, Rochester Hills. Before my official time begins, I'd like to just comment quickly that...
Actually, you have 3 minutes.
Okay. Well, because I am from Rochester Hills, I do have a right, because it's a public... That was an issue last time about me being able to speak. But I'd just like to go on record tonight regarding several things.
One moment for me. Ms. Dufresne, can you start the clock? Okay, cool. You're on, ma'am. Sorry to...
I just want to be clear that I don't view the applicants as not being my friends, as was implied at the last meeting. I certainly don't have that feeling toward them at all. I myself am of Middle Eastern descent, and Middle Eastern people are my dearest friends. I completely understand the culture. I do, however, want to just bring a few points forward. I do not view the applicants as being enemies or evil or non-citizens, anything of that nature. They have every right to build a place of worship. I am not opposed to the Muslim people or any people who believe differently from me. Practically speaking, I personally live beyond being tolerant. I sincerely see all people as souls who are specifically and demonstrably loved by God, and I myself seek to specifically love and demonstrably love. I appreciate Muslims' great sincerity. I want to point out something, though, here that as their attorney was talking about the culture, you cannot separate Islam from Islamic culture. Islam is more than a religion. Islam is a culture. It's a way of life. It is a financial entity. It is a social entity. It's a legal entity. The applicants need to be in acceptance and compliance with Troy's zoning laws. The applicants should not seek to change our laws or any ordinances to meet their desires. The applicants have the right to build someplace other than 4924 Rochester Road to fulfill their religious and cultural beliefs. Are the applicants seeking to open a place of worship in the guise of a community center? And what is a community center? My definition, as I was just thinking about it tonight, is a community center is an all-inclusive, multicultural facility in a community that supplies the needs of, I would say, over 90% of the community. Therefore, as a board, you've got to ask yourself, will the applicants be allowing the same types of activities at their center that our Troy Community Center allows? For example, Bible study group meetings in our Troy Community Center, weddings, bridal and baby showers, bridal receptions, Republican meetings, art, craft group activities, bar and bat mitzvahs, music recitals, and a First Communion reception. These are all examples of things that have taken place at our Troy Community Center. Adam Community Center is stating that no worship will take place at the proposed location. Is the group worshiping at its current location? If not, are they strictly a community center? If they are a community center as stated?
Your time's up. Would anyone else like to speak on this matter? And I know last month, we had quite a few speakers. I assume we do tonight. In the interest of time, if you could form kind of a general line to the back, and so when you see someone finishing up, the next person come forward, that would just make it possible to get everybody through and make the evening as short as possible. Is there anybody else who would like to speak on this matter?
Good evening.
Good evening, sir.
My name is Latfi Saleh. I live in Troy, in Rochester Villas. Actually, I need to talk about 2 points. I'll try to wrap very quickly. The first one is a little bit about Islam. In Islam, there are 5 prayers, and we are required by the religion to pray as much as possible on time. So if we are in a meeting, if we can hold the meeting to do the prayer on time when there is a call for prayer, the 5 times, whenever the meeting is, we have to stop then. Even in the meeting room, sometimes we stop when we do prayer. So I don't want, I wish, that to bring the issue, is it a community center? We pray anytime. If I'm in the park with my friends and the prayer time comes, we do prayer. My son came last time, he's in grade 12 in Athens High School. In Athens High School, it's a government high school. On Friday, a Christian teacher hosts Muslim students to do Jum'ah or the Friday prayer. It's done by them. Can we call the Athens High School, it's a school or it's a worship area? I think it's the same case. In all big companies like Ford, General Motors, they assign a room for whatever Muslim they can do prayer. It's the same case. So prayer, we can do it anytime. The second one, which I believe it's quite important for you maybe to read about it at your own time. In where there is a Muslim, majority of Muslim like Egypt and Saudi, there are different type of worship. There is something like a corner, we call it in Arabic zawiyah, and there is a masjid, and there is a jami'ah. And actually there are quite different between them based on which prayer is going to be done. So if you can imagine that, in a small area where the number of Muslims are very small, we don't want a very big worship area, right? So actually maybe you should consider trying to amend in the future to have different type of permissions for worship, even for masjid, for Muslim worship areas. I encourage all of you maybe to read on the internet, everything is available. What is the different type of worships, size or whatever we have in Islam? Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Please come up, ma'am. Looks like you're next.
Hi, my name is Laura Scharfenkamp. I'm a resident of Troy. One of my concerns is that clearly on its face, we have this organization filing a statement saying it's a worship center, and it seems like they failed to do their due diligence prior to filing, because they filed as a worship center, and clearly that was their intent. And now, when it's much more convenient financially for them to not be a worship center, they're stating that they're not a worship center and primarily a community center. So that's my concern. This situation makes me think of Faith Lutheran Church in Troy. I know that Faith Lutheran, during the course of a week, has parenting classes. For instance, this Saturday, they have physics classes, Western civilization courses. There are all kinds of speakers that come in. I mean, you could take their format. They have soccer fields. They have a gymnasium. There are barn dances. There are all kinds of functions that happen. If you change the words and some of the buildings on the plans for the church, you could change those names, and it would no longer look like a house of worship if that were convenient. What I'm saying is that I have to wonder if they aren't going to have special get-togethers, even if they're informal, for holy days in Islam. That could create traffic problems that are different than a business. A business could have a steady flow of cars throughout the day, whereas you might have a special influx and outgoing of cars there. I have to tell you, I bank at the Chase that's there, and that's already a pretty dangerous corner. And so my concern is that you're going to have additional traffic flow during the day and in the evenings, whenever their worship times are in particular. That could be a problem. So to me, it just seems clear that, oh, I'm sorry. It looks like my time is up.
You've got 45 seconds.
Okay. It just seems to me that clearly their original intent is what happened. They just failed to do their due diligence. And I think it's perfectly appropriate to hold them accountable and to look at the larger issues. And I respectfully request that you do that. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Sir? Evening.
Hi, my name is Awad. Actually, I'm a resident of Troy. I'm also a business owner in Troy, Michigan. I'm the Avis Butcher Rent-A-Car owner. I have a small area in my own business building designated for prayers. So does that make my building a mosque? No. Even the taxi drivers, limo drivers who come to Troy, drop off somebody, when the prayer time comes, they stop by my building, perform their prayers, and move on. Second thing is, a lady asked whether people can come in and do things in the building. Everybody's welcome. I mean, we're living in a dangerous world, and nowadays, you know, we do interfaith meetings. We invite people to come, conversate, meet us, come to know us, so we can know them too, so we can make a better place. So that's all I have to say.
Thank you, sir. Good evening, sir.
My name is Sarwat Siddiqui. I am a Troy resident for last 15 years. At my home, one room is designated as a worship room. I have about 7 rooms in my house. So it doesn't mean that it's a worship place. I strongly support this idea, community center. That's all I want to say.
Thank you, sir. Good evening, sir.
Mr. Chairman, respected board members, my name is Imtiaz Zafar. I'm a resident of Sterling Heights. I live 3 miles from the Adams Community Center building, and I serve as the principal of the Adams Sunday School. The Adams Community Center will be a great place for youth and elderly in our community, arguably the two most vulnerable groups in our society. The youth need positive role models and much direction to become responsible citizens. We intend to offer youth-centric programs, help with schoolwork, ACT classes, and awareness about the scourge of drugs so rampant in every community. The importance of doing well at school, of serving community, being involved in civic activities. We all aspire that our kids become morally upright and responsible human beings. There is no better way to do this than involving them in community affairs that instills in them the spirit of volunteerism and giving, just as you are all doing as part of this board, and I commend you for that. In the community center environment, they'll be able to interact with each other, which would help them grow and build confidence to succeed in adult life. We must do our part as responsible citizens of a progressive community by providing such an environment. The elderly will be able to socialize, share stories, discuss cultural issues, essential for older folks to stay happy and healthy and keep a sense of belonging that many of them don't feel nowadays and really need. This community center is no different than what the early European denominational communities did that came from different parts of Europe with their own distinct cultural identities and wanted to preserve their heritage. It is a natural progression for a Muslim community that is growing in numbers and becoming more visible in all spheres of life in America. The children born to Muslims here bear the same characteristics as Christian and Jewish children, with a strong faith in the ideals of the United States Constitution, but a Muslim identity, and that identity cannot be sustained without community-based structures that serve as symbols of one's belonging. For the sake of the youth and the elderly, I urge the board to honor the original determination of a community center by the city of Troy. It can only be a positive. And I'll leave you with this. It was said by FDR, if civilization is to survive, we must cultivate the science of human relationships, the ability of all peoples, of all kinds, to live together in the same world at peace. I won't go as far as the world, but at least we can try in Troy. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Ma'am? Good evening, ma'am.
Good evening. My name is Mary Shiner. I've been a resident, for 40 years. I appreciate the Muslim Brotherhood, and I know they're prayerful people, but it sort of bothers me that you can file legal documents telling the federal government and the state that you are a church. And then you lie about that, in essence, because you want to make this a community center, but you're going to have worship there. That makes me feel like you're not that honest with us in Troy. I'm sorry, my allergies are very bad at this time, but
Would you like some water?
No, it's okay. I would like to say that no matter what happens here, my biggest concern is the traffic pattern. That is a very dangerous intersection there, and they're just going to be a little bit beyond that, south of that intersection. There are so many accidents there, and I can't imagine people running in there to say their prayers and not creating a problem. I drive that intersection a lot, and I'm very careful because it is so congested. So my feeling is, just like that young woman, they didn't do the right thing in filing those papers. And I don't think anybody coming into our city and trying to fool us it's wrong. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Is there someone else who would like to speak on the matter? If so, please come up. Good evening, sir.
Hi, good evening. My name is Anwar Hussain. I am a resident of Troy for the last 22 years. I live in Long Lake and John R. Corner, a couple miles away from this community center. Couple things I'd like to answer. Traffic jam, just remember that the restaurant that used to operate there, they have capacity of 224 people, and they used to have lots of banquet over there. The community we have only like 50 to 60 members. It's much less, much smaller group than what the restaurant used to operate on. And they used to serve alcohol late night, so they actually used to create more traffic problem than what we'll be creating. We don't serve any alcohol. It will be all peaceful activity, community activity. The second thing is that about the original document, yes, we have a goal to acquire a building. We actually inquire about the empty building next to, I think, opposite side of city, where they do all kind of compost material they deliver. There's a back-end land, and we are inquiring about that too. So our ultimate goal is, yes, whenever we can find a nice back-end land, we will go for the big prayer building. But right now we are not. So just to clarify that, that's the way 2009 it was created, that whenever you get a big empty space and you can afford it, we'll go for it. But right now, again, there's nothing to hide. Its primary purpose of this building will be community service. Let me tell you, I'm working for GM for the last 28 years, and I work in the different city of Michigan. Tech Center, Warren Tech Center, GM provided us big room, almost like 80 to 90 people go there 5 times a day, pray over there. It's open 24 hours. We don't call that building a mosque. This is still GM Engineering Center. So just to clarify that issue, just you go occasionally pray, as the previous speaker mentioned that, we pray when prayer time comes. Even if the picnic area, we go to the park, prayer time comes, we just go, line up down in the assembly and pray. So that doesn't make this park is a mosque or a worship place. Again, there's nothing to hide over there. Yes, our intent is in the future, we'll build a mosque somewhere in Troy, because there's no mosque in Troy, but not right now, not in this community center. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Is there someone else who'd like to speak? I think we have a line forming. Is that it? Okay, sorry. Kind of police yourself and kind of get to the back of it. That'd be great. Come on forward, sir. Good evening.
Good evening. My name is Saeed Dayan. I'm a Troy resident. I think Adam is a...
Pardon me for a minute. I'm sorry. Paul, can we reset the clock? Thank you. Sorry about that. Go ahead, sir.
I think Adam is a community center. I pray whenever I can, regardless of where I am. And I feel that if Adam is established as a community center, I can learn much more, because often there are scholars that come by and I can ask them questions which I need. And I'm interested in like my background, and if there is a community center there that I can go to where people can help me, it would greatly help me greatly expand my knowledge. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Evening, sir.
Hi. My name is Mohammad Qureshi. I live in Troy, and basically, I'm very excited about this. When I heard about this community center, because there will be many activities in the center, which my kids can utilize, like Sunday school and other events. And regarding, there was one concern about the traffic, and somebody spoke about it, that if there are some like holidays and there will be some like gathering, just like we have like in banquet halls. So in businesses like restaurant business, which we have there, like weekends they are like a full pack. There's so much traffic there. I mean, but does it mean that the city does not issue them the business license, because on the weekend when there will be more traffic than normal days, there will be some more traffic? So I don't think that's a very logical concern. And I'm in very much favor of this idea. We are a very small community in Troy, and we needed something like this, because America is known for its, for giving freedom to all the religious, ethnic background people here. So I would very much, appreciate this idea and request you guys to let this thing happen. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Ma'am, please come forward. Good evening.
Good evening. My name is Padma Kupa. I'm a member of the Hindu community. I'm here to speak not about the faith issue, but about the pluralism and the diversity that we embrace. One of the reasons that I chose to live in Troy is because of its diversity. I believe that as a Hindu, as any American, I would be welcomed in the Adam Cultural Center, Community Center. I understand the need to build a center by this organization because there are aspects of culture that are not necessarily religious, like the linguistic, like the music or the dance or the poetry, the literature. And so I also understand that they may have filed as a religious, I think Mr. Eisenbacher brought this up, in 2013 and prior years, but that does not mean a religious house of worship does not do other things beyond the religious. We have examples here in Troy of Woodside Bible, Faith Lutheran, that someone else also brought up. They offer basketball. It's not that the Troy Community Center isn't offering basketball. Troy Parks and Rec offers basketball, but the church is also offering. So we do have to see that when they are a group that is filing as a religious center doesn't necessarily mean that the use of the property that they purchase is only going to be a religious center. And I think that you should take that into consideration. Thank you very much.
Thank you, ma'am. Please come forward, sir. Evening.
My name is Taulant Kadiu. I'm the director of the Balkan American Community Center in Troy, Big Beaver. I'm just here to maybe help out clarify the definition of the community center and how we could. Well, let me tell what we do, and maybe that could help. Not much different as a Carpathian, offering educational, cultural, sportive activities. In addition, we have a hall that we occasionally rent to members or non-for-profit, not any different than the Troy Community Center. Now we have a very diverse group of people there. Orthodox Christians, Muslims, being from the Balkans. And we have never ever had any problem having a pastor come and teach on the weekend school program to the Christian community, or have another community rent a hall and do their prayer. So this is part of the community where we live, and being definition of community, we have to accept the diversity in it. Seeing and noticing a lot of this religious linguistics coming around here, I think we should be focused more on the community center approach of this center, if that's the real intention of these people here. That's all I had to say, and hopefully this resolves and helps a little bit. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Ma'am, please come forward. Good evening.
Good evening. My name is Shirley Parrott. I've lived in Troy for about 40 years. I don't think there's an issue with the fact that they pray on a regular basis. No one has an issue with that, I don't think. This tax issue is a very serious thing, and that's the thing I'm concerned with. He said that, their lawyer, I believe, said that that's something they need to clear up. Okay then, put everything on hold, let them clear it up. There you go.
Thank you, ma'am. Sir, please come forward. Good evening.
Good evening. My name is Javed Ahmed. I live in Troy almost 20 years. I moved my jobs, decided many times to move out, but the diversified culture of Troy, good schools, community centers, good neighborhood, always forced me to stay here. 2005, I built my new house because I believe our kids can learn more from the community centers and the diversified cultures. So I personally support it. Anything mistake they did it, they should learn from this. Nobody disagree with the mistakes, but that should not stop their way to go and do good things for the community, you know. So that's, we are strongly supported, you know. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Good evening, ma'am.
Good evening. I'm Barbara Harrell, and I've lived in Troy just over 19 years. First, I'd like to point out that they filed legal documents as a place of worship. That needs to be taken very, very seriously. And just incidentally, we have a really nice newer community center that anybody can use for cultural things, for social activities. They can all be done at our beautiful Troy Community Center. I know I was just there today helping teach English as a second language class. Also, several other cultural groups use the Troy Community Center for dance, cultural events, and teaching and things, as well as many, many things for youth that I see when I'm there. Finally, I wanted to thank you all for all the work you do on the councils and boards before you. Some of you have been on councils and boards before this. And I know I don't know the depth of it, but you've worked long hours and very hard to try to make Troy a good community. And I know it may look easy, but it's not easy. But I would just ask you all and remind you that in Troy, we are always been and are a nation of laws, rules, not of men. I ask you to please employ wisdom and discernment, not legal spin, when issuing your decision tonight. And please remember, they filed as a place of worship legal documents with the government. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, ma'am. Sir, please come forward. Good evening.
Good evening, sir. My name is Tufal Hussein, and I just moved to Troy a couple months ago from New York. So I grew up kind of big cities. I've seen different things in my life. So when I was a young boy in high school, right before Rudolph Giuliani took over, New York was kind of mess city. So I was in high school at that time. So we used to spend time in a church, evening time. So one day the sister came in and she was asking what religion I belong to. And I said, I'm Muslim. She said, you are obligated to pray. And I said, where am I going to pray? She said, you can pray in the corner of the church. And that church is located in Lower East Side, if anyone familiar with New York City, on 11th Street. And until today, this church is not a mosque, it's a church. I prayed there because I'm Muslim and I'm obligated to pray. And that does not mean I prayed and the church became a mosque. If it's a community center was built, and if gentleman right there, chairman is a Muslim or Christian, or Hindus, or Jewish, I'm pretty sure the community center will allow you or her to perform their religion. And one more thing about the IRS tax, I'm not in a law enforcement agency. And as we know, as we read, how many of us, I'm not saying I did, but how many of us filed wrong tax? So how many people are not self-employed? Whenever they file tax return, in order to get earned income credit, they put their self-employed. I'm pretty sure Dr. Amin is not, that whenever he goes for tax return, probably community center was looking how they could get more beneficiary in tax return. That does not mean they are a mosque. Probably they are, I'm not saying they did, probably they are looking for better tax exempt. So again, the community center, if Muslim prays once or twice or 3 times a day while they're working or they are having meeting, that will not make a church, that will not make a mosque, or that will not make as a temple. And I do understand, gentlemen, you have a very hard task to do. It could be in the news. That's the reason probably maybe worry about that. But do a good task, and that will help the younger people. Sometimes it's good to understand their own culture. So if a community center, the young people goes there, they spend their background, probably that will help the community in the long run. Thank you, gentlemen, for your time.
Thank you, sir. Could the next speaker come up? Evening, miss.
My name is Enam Said, and I am a senior at Athens High School. We just moved to Troy because of the diversity here. I really appreciate being able to connect with other people who share my faith and culture. I want a place that I can gather with my friends who share my background and discuss what we have in common and how to work through anything that comes up. It is important to have a place where we can meet and listen to role models who can help us as we grow up in Troy while respecting and valuing our heritage. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Is there someone else who'd like to speak on the matter? I believe this gentleman's in the back, but if... Evening, sir.
Good evening. My name is Omar Kakari. I live in Troy for 15 years, almost 12 years. My kids go to Lerner School, which is half a mile from the proposed community center. A story of us tonight is the opposition for this as a community center, and that's why you come to it's at the end of it is politics. It's the end of it is politics. Make your own decision. That those people who are going to be in the community center are going to be exposed to all other rules and all things. If we're going to build the mosque later on, why not? We get the fund. If we don't have a place to start and build our fund, but the end of it is politics. Good night.
Thank you, sir. Evening, sir.
Evening. My name is Meg Diasak, and I live in Troy since 1996. I've been attending the session here from the beginning, and I wanted to wait patiently till the end to make sure that I hear all the voices from the community. As I gathered, the main concern here is it's not going to be a place of worship or a community center. The main concern is the issue of filing the paperwork. So I would put my vote to put everybody's mind at peace. This issue has to be reconciled first, so people in the community don't feel like somebody is trying to invade into their privacy or try to manipulate the system or any of that matter. So I would put my proposal that this issue has to be resolved first. This way, when they come in the clear, there is no issue. Everybody sees the same picture. And at the same time, the community center here in Troy is a wonderful place for everybody to gather and practice whatever activity that they want to do until the board finalizes the issue. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Evening, sir.
My name is Saeed Hussein. I live in Troy for a few years. I think our community center is Adam Community Center. I think is a non-profit organization because Dr. Amin and Dr. Uddin told us they are not raise any money. Let's say like if I go and celebrate any birthday, not birthday party, let's say like my son's graduation party. They are not going to charge me any money. It's free. And basically what I will do is I will take some food and stuffs there. And, some of his friends and probably your children is going to come and, eat there. So I think it's a non-profit organization. It is not it is not like a business place or anything. So it is my opinion, a non-profit organization should be without, tax. We should not bring a tax for, profit, this kind of, tax. If you guys, charge them the tax, they will charge us. And then this is not a, community center. Then everybody has to be, pay money. But I think that this is a non-profit organization. It is not a business place. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Please come forward, sir. Don't be shy. You can pull the mic down if you want.
My name is Huzaifa Qureshi, and I want the community center to be open because then I can meet people my age, so that I can play with people and get new friends. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Hello there, gentlemen. My name is Tim.
I just wanted to make sure that there is a face behind the document received. I thought I did that last time, but I didn't. I attest to everything to the accuracy of that document, everything that's in there. That document probably took me 300 hours to produce and research. Regardless of what this man says, I will contest anything heel to heel with him on that document. As far as Mr. Amin and that little boy that just came up here, I'd like to find a way of allowing them to go there. However, I still stand by what I have stated in the document as far as my research shows. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Is there anyone else who would like to speak on this matter? Please come forward. Hello, ma'am.
Good evening, everybody. I have only one question.
We need you to state your name.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. I have only one question. What is the meaning of worship and the praying?
I need you to, for our records, we just need you to state your name and then go ahead.
Oh, my name is Laila Amin. I live in Rochester. I have only one question. What is the meaning of the praying and worship? Almighty God who sent us in this world, in this universe, in this world, it is a great sin for us to grateful to Him and to pray, remember Him. We are working, we are praying, we remember Him. We just gratitude to Him that He who sent us this world, give us knowledge, give us what is the education, give it the good health, good environment, give us good food. And it is a great sin for Him who to gratitude Him and to pray for Him, to remember Him. Just only one question. Praying is to remember the God, just Allah, who is created us and sent us in this world. And this universe is created by whom? Okay, who gives us the good husband, good wife, good children? Is it a good, great sin for him, for us to pray for Him, to remember Him, to grateful to Him? Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, ma'am. Next speaker, please. Good evening, sir.
Hi, my name is Asad Ali. I'm a resident of Troy. I moved 20 years ago to Troy, and I have my 4 children born in this city. Went to the high school here, and there are some of them still in high school. I've been involved in a lot of community service organization in Troy, and especially motivating our young children and the family to be involved with. Whether it's a crop walk, whether it's a community service organization, the Interfaith. I've been a part of the Interfaith, Troy Interfaith. I've been part of the committee that had the every year the breakfast, prayer breakfast. So when I heard about this news, that some of the community members are initiating that community center concept here, because whenever these programs happen, I invite people to my house, or we go somewhere else to find a place to meet, because I want to be host as well, as a representing a Muslim community in Troy. So I encourage this for great thing for ourselves, for the community, as well as our children. The community center is basically, in my mind, is to bring people together to work together, whether it's from within the community or bringing people from outside to have a better relationship. And my kid, I always say, they're born in this country, they're going to live in this country, they need to learn the culture, they need to get involved in this community. And this is the opportunity I always look for, where to bring my community, my family, where I can have an interaction with others. Now, the big question comes up about the religious organization versus the community center. And I think Adam, when they have, I have very little interaction with them, but I know as an Adam, as an organization, they want the Troy community, Muslim community, want to have a place that they want to go for 5-time prayers. But this is not the place for that. This is a very small place to have a mosque or an Islamic center. But what we want is to start a place where we can have a community coming together and help them to interact with other communities. And I think this is a great opportunity. And I think we want our children, Troy children of Muslims, and interact with others to bring this community, make it stronger. And I really appeal the committee to consider that from the community perspective, not from the religious perspective, because this is very, very important. And I have learned, and I have seen my children and my friends and their children, they see the value into it, contributing their time to the society, to the community. And I thank you very much for the opportunity. I hope you will consider that as a community service place instead of having a worship place. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Next speaker, please. Evening, sir.
Evening. Yes, my name is John Michalak. I've been a Troy resident for 29 years. And some of the things that bothered me, we clearly, in my mind, have an organization here that's clearly has a worship intent, religious intent. And it's been that way for the past 5 filings or so. And their intent, even admittedly so, going forward, is to also be a community center, to be a place of worship. And what we're looking at here is a stopgap measure that's going to help them get to the place of worship. I've got no problem, and I think it was good, the comment that was made before. They're seeking a place of worship, find a place that's zoned for that. There's other churches and all that are zoned in that sense. Find the place and do it. But the stopgap measure, to me, it seems very obvious. What the intent of the stopgap measure is to start at a church, or in this case here, a mosque, a place of worship, really. So to me, it's the whole thing kind of fits together. It's wonderful that people want to do what they want to do, and they're seeking permission to do that. But I think that in this case here, it's not zoned for a place of worship. There are places that are, so I would really suggest and recommend that be considered. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Next speaker, please. Evening, sir.
Good evening. My name is Bob Cornwall. I'm the pastor of Central Woodward Christian Church. I'm also the convener of the Troy Area Interfaith Group. I spoke in December. I just wanted to reiterate or kind of interpret a piece of the conversation that we're hearing tonight so that we're really clear. In the tax filings, as I understand it, they filed as a religious organization for the purpose of worship. That is their intent as an organization. That is different from the use of the building. The building is not intended to be a worship center. So I think what I'm hearing people say is they're trying to oppose this group because they filed as a religious organization for the purpose of prayer and worship. That is their intent long term. It's not the purpose of the use of the building. I think we need to make that distinction really clear so that a proper decision can be made. Otherwise, we may be penalizing people because we're putting stereotypes upon them and wanting them and assuming ideas and purposes for which they are not intending this building to be used. So let's not hold it against them that their intent is to be a religious organization for the purpose of worship. That's the way they filed as an organization. Separate that out from the use of the building, which is not as a place of worship. Thank you very much, and I hope you will make a right decision. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Next speaker. Please come forward quickly, sir. No problem. Good evening.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Madi Rahman. I am a resident of Troy. I believe it is important that Adam is given the title of community center. If there is a community center, I could go to Adam, discuss things with kids who share my faith and culture. This can help me grow in my knowledge. Please, and I beg you to give us the right to call this a community center. Good evening.
Thank you, sir. Is there another speaker? Please come forward, sir. If there's any others that want to speak, if you kind of can make your way to the back so you can come forward quickly, that would be great. Hello, sir.
Hi, my name is Clifton Dolly, and it gives me pause to realize that the Adam congregation has removed Facebook page from their website since the last ZBA meeting, and that Facebook page implied worship on the documentation that was on that page. And if they're seeking to involve the community at large, why did they delete their social media site? Then also, my wife had submitted documentation to the board, and the lawyer of Dr. Amin implied that she had doctored those pictures, or that they had been doctored pictures. And I just want to make the statement that there was no doctoring to the documentation that was given to the board.
Thank you, sir. Is there anyone else who would like to speak on the matter tonight? Not seeing anyone wanting to, I'm going to close the public session portion of this. Excuse me. Sorry. Mr. Amin, would you like to speak? Thank you.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you very
Hold
much.
on for a minute, sir. We'll reset the clock for you.
My name is Nurul Amin. I am the president of this organization, Adam Community Center. Our intention is to do something good for the community. When we want to occupy a place, Merrill Church in Mount Road and 21 Mile, they said, we want to give you the church. And can you form an organization so that you can buy this church? So it was $2 million, but I tried my best. We were only 3 people at that time. And tried my best to form an organization so that we can get this church and get donation from people, but we did not get anything. So we said that this is not possible, so they lowered the price to 1.1. And still we could not buy that church with our home equity and anything. It was motivated by Dan Mendy from the city of Sterling Heights. So that was the reason at that time it was formed as a church, as a religious organization to buy it, to occupy it, to purchase a church, but we could not get that. After that, we had several meetings with Mr. Brandt and also Mr. Paul. We wanted to buy or purchase several buildings and to meet the code. Even in this building, when I came, Mr. Brandt said, we talked to each other that this is not a place of worship because it's a rectangular, is a L-shaped building, and direction of prayer, according to Muslim, is 53 degree northeast, and it does not meet this building any of these regulations. So that this building is not suitable for a worship, for individual 2, 3, 5 people maybe, but it's not like a mosque like ISGD or any other Islamic center. So this building, we want to build a community as a bring community together to help the community so that we can do our cultural activity, social get-together, all the graduation parties, national festivals, meeting place for friendship and relatives, wedding receptions, conference centers, speakers. We brought many speakers, scholarly people. Every Saturday we can bring scholarly people, and also group studies for all these students we can help them together. Group studies, we have many, many scholarly people, we can do that. And also we have a plan to make medical help to uninsured people who are, my wife who came before, she's also serving the Farmington Hill. There is a voluntary center for the medical people. And also this type of activities we want to do. Why a mosque? Mosque is only 1 hour use in 24 hours. A community center is used 18 hours.
Can you finish up in 15 seconds?
Yeah, I finished my time.
Okay, you finished.
So I support this community center.
Thank you, sir.
If you have any questions.
Yes. Just a minute, sir. Apparently, I think we may. Mr. Eisenbach, do you have a question?
I was just looking for a clarification of the statement that the attorney had in his letter, where it would be a place of worship. And the thing that occurred to me in reading through all the documentation was there was no clarification if you were of the same denomination or the same school as the other surrounding mosques, or you would...
Yeah, same denomination. So they are Sunni, Muslim, we pray, they are IAGD, so it's same.
Okay.
Any additional questions for Mr. Amin, Dr. Amin?
Mr. Chairman?
Mr. Lambert?
Dr. Amin, one of the questions that I kind of posed to your attorney was, if we were to define you as a club, one of the things we would look at is, do you have any kind of dues structure, or do you have bylaws? Do you have anything along that line? Or how do you determine who is able to use the facilities for your community activities?
We have 50 members. These are related. If a mosque is open all to every people, but as a community center is open to all the members who are listed in this center, who are giving some dues and all these things. So it is a limited number of people who wants to do some function or organization and set up or meeting, then these are for very limited people. It's not open to all like a worshiping place.
If anything additional, Mr. Lambert? No? Any additional questions for Mr. Amin, Dr. Amin? Excuse me, Ms. Dufresne?
That's okay. Mr. Chairman, I would ask Dr. Amin to tell the board when the property was purchased.
Oh, thank you.
We came here, first met with Mr. Brand in the beginning before they start the negotiation. And after in the Bar Valley, we had a meeting with all officials of the city of Troy, fire marshal and everybody was there, 6, 7 people. That told us that I gave this plan to them, and this plan shows everything. This is the plan that we submitted to the city, and you can see from this plan, I don't know if it can be seen here. In this plan, we have this building. This is about 1,800 square foot, this is 1,300. And in this building, we have exercise room, reading room, library, and also other areas for these social activities. So this is
Excuse me, Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
We've seen the paper, we've seen the drawings, but when did you buy the property?
after we get the preliminary approval and the letter from the city that your determination is a community center. Then we bought this, finally completed the purchase.
When?
When?
And I think it's July, August, October.
October.
So, Dr.
Thank
Amin,
you.
is it your contention that you received some form of approval, written or verbal?
Written, because when we met with the fire marshal said we have already permitted for 210 people as a restaurant. Yeah, and if you can enter immediately, you can enter there. But this building has a very bad use of the building. It cannot be used as it is. And I met with Mr. Kessler. He said, why don't you submit a plan so that what you want to keep and what you want to remove. And then we completed the purchase, and we asked the community, there was a 12-inch high pedestal here that Mr. Tim Ferrashin said it is something for a Muslim. No, when we open, it's giving a bad smell inside this pedestal.
I understand, but what I'm not clear about, and I just want your opinion, is at what point did you reach where you felt that you had a understanding from the city that your use was approved? Who gave that to you?
Seven meeting, I met with Mr. Mark Miller and all the city officials. They asked several questions, and then after that they issue a letter that it is a community center, and then we completed the purchase.
And then it was later you received another correspondence saying, hold up, or we do not.
After when it is hold up, at least we completed the purchase and demolition started. Almost we spent $30,000 for demolition inside the room.
Understand. Hold on for a moment, sir. question for staff. I've looked at so many documents. I hate to ask this question, but do we have a copy of the original letter in our packet?
The letter from,
The letter from the city saying this is good.
yeah, I'll show it to you.
All right, thank you.
It's page 134, and it's an email.
Okay, thank you.
October 2nd.
Yep. Okay, thank you. I appreciate that, Mr. Evans. Thank you. I don't have any additional questions for you, sir. Is there anybody else who has an additional question? Mr.
For staff.
For staff, go ahead. Oh, hold up, sir. We may have one more question for you, so let's go.
What was the date? What was the date of the letter telling them to hold up? I've got it here, but I can't find it right now.
Yeah, I'll find it.
I think at 28th of October. Is that right?
Document number 131, October 28th.
Yes, October 28th, 2013, page 131 of your packet.
What was that date again?
October 28th.
Are there additional questions for Dr. Amin from the board?
Just one.
Mr. Krent.
Excuse me.
Dr. Amin, we do have one more question up here for you.
Because all of these dates fall in October, what was the exact purchase date, the date that your purchase was signed?
September 24th.
September 24th. Okay, that's when you purchased the property.
I would ask, if possible, if at the conclusion of tonight we have, if it, and I don't know how the board will vote, but if it determines that we make a determination that's favorable to you, can you provide a copy of that deed to the city just for the records? Okay, I appreciate that. Thank you. Any additional questions for Dr. Amin? No? I appreciate you coming up, sir. Thank you. Is there anyone else who would like to speak on this matter? Seeing none, I'm going to close the public hearing, and I'm going to bring this matter back before the board. Before we bring this to discussion for us, I do have a question for you, Mr. Evans, just because it's been a long night, and we're doing something unusual here. Can you, in a couple sentences again, reiterate so we can blow the cobwebs out of our ears that what our role is to interpret whether or not their use as a community center?
Yes, and I'll refer to the agenda pack, or my presentation rather.
I think it's best for the viewers of this meeting, if anybody's viewing it in the future, that they understand that right at this
Sure.
point.
So, at the bottom where I have to clarify, the request before the board is to interpret the proposed use. Now, what we're not asking the board to do is review the city administration's determination. That determination was its own process. We're asking the board to interpret the use. Now, we're not being asked to approve or disapprove the use for the site, just interpret the use. What is the use?
Thank you. In opening this up for discussion with the board, I'm going to make my own statement or opinion. I'm reminded of something that happened about 2 years ago. Someone very important to me, my best friend, my fiance, who I'm going to marry later this year, she was at a hospital. She was with a good friend from work. She's Lutheran, which is Christian. Her good friend, who's a PhD engineer, works for Ford. She works for Ford. His son was dying. He said to her, he said, "Would you pray for my son?" Which she was willing to do. And then he said, "Don't pray to my God, pray to your God. Pray to your God, because I don't know who's closer to God. I don't know if your way of believing in God is closer than mine, or my way of believing in God is closer to what God wants. But please pray. Now, the boy made a complete recovery, which is great. I don't know if the prayers had anything to do with that. But I know that we have many people in business in this community that believe many different things, many different faiths. And there's certainly an understanding and I think a connection that occurred in that person's time and place. And I think it occurs in the city because we really are a diverse area. I don't care if they pray inside, personally. I think it will occur. It'll occur in my church. I'm Lutheran. I've also been Catholic. Happens in community centers, rectories, in the sanctuary. Along with that, we have speakers, we have dinners, we have Bible study, we have all sorts of things. Now, I know the paperwork on some of their filings is wrong, and that is a problem. I think we might have elected some governors and presidents, if I'm clear, that have made mistakes in paperwork. I know I've made mistakes in paperwork. I know of some clients who made mistakes in paperwork and ended up involved with major fines from the DEQ and the US EPA because of it, and it was an error, and they still had to pay those fines. But in the end, everybody knew that it was just that, an error. And in some cases, those things were made to go away because everybody understood they were an error. I don't know what's supposed to happen with their paperwork. I think it's an issue, and that's the reason why I brought it up tonight, because I think it was a linchpin. And they have said publicly, and I know the city of Troy, through its compliance, would hold them to it, that they will change that paperwork and this will operate not as a mosque. And so I'm going to hold them, in my mind, to their honor. I believe that's their intent. So tonight, in the end, will be voting in favor that the use is not a mosque, that it is some form of community center, and that they should be able to continue on. And that's just my thoughts. And I'd like to open this up again for other thoughts and comments from the board and discussion. Mr. Bloomingdale.
A question for staff. Typically, we're not allowed to consider financial impacts pro or con in regard to zoning ordinances. Does that statement hold true in regard to this interpretation?
I would say that in this particular case, you should not consider any financial impacts. Mr. Chairman, I might be a little bit out of order here. You had asked me to direct some comments to the supplemental memorandum that the attorney.
If you've had time to review that and have an opinion, please provide.
And I'm not sure if this is where Mr. Bloomingdale is going with his question. That's why I bring it up at this point. If the question is whether there was some reliance on Dr. Amin's part with respect to the city's initial decision. That was the only part of the supplemental memorandum that gave me pause. That was Roman numeral number 2, suggesting that there was reliance on the city's original decision and substantial detriment. And that's why I did ask Dr. Amin to clarify when the property was purchased, which was September 24th, which would have been before the city's the first decision by the city. So does that answer your question, Mr. Bloomingdale?
I'd like I will say in one sentence, yes or no. Are we allowed to consider financial impacts in this particular interpretation of business we're about now, or no?
The same rules that apply to your regular deliberations would apply to this, so I would say
so
no.
That's no.
Mr. Crown.
Since we've been sitting here for well over 2.5 hours, I could use a break. I know this discussion is going to go on for quite a bit of time. Would you approve a 5-minute break?
I have no problems with that as long as no one on the board has any issue. No? I think we'd like to
Always time for a
take a 5-minute recess. could all take our seats. We are in deliberation of item 4C, and I'd like to open this up back to the board for discussion on this matter. And I'd like to hear from the board if any board members have comments or questions, etc. Mr. Courtney, we'll start with you in the end.
Okay, somebody said something about the intersection and the ordinance on the intersection saying service. Intersections L, which happens to be this one, does mention two others, shall remain predominantly commercial, catering to local needs and regional traffic. New development and redevelopment should be mostly commercial and should serve to further enhance the successful commercial area. It doesn't mention this intersection being open to services. Commercial. That again is somewhat irrelevant to what we're discussing anyway. But I just thought since the word service was brought into that area.
Do you think what they would like to do is more of a service then? Is it your?
Oh, I think this would not fit the definition here, but
of commercial.
But it is, it still would be taking a building that's there and using it.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not really a redevelopment. And eventually, if you had a choice, you'd want a commercial development there.
Oh, yeah, I get what you're saying. Sure, sure.
The only reason I brought that up was somebody had mentioned that the ordinance said services, and it did not. Not for this intersection.
I understand. Just a minute, Mr. Bloomingdale. Was there some comment on this side relative to Mr. Courtney's comments? Okay. Mr. Bloomingdale, please.
Mr. Chairman, about midway in the 30 speakers or so that we've heard, it was stated in regard to a legal document, and I'm going to use that as an opening to say that our responsibility here is to interpret the intended use of this facility. I take exception to two of the comments that the first speaker said, the attorney, when he said the primary use of this building, or I'm going to read his letter actually, and then he confirmed it verbally. Its primary use will not be as a place of worship. There's another comment to that same effect, and I want to point out to the board that under the city attorney's directive, it's stated, and I'd like to read it versus, well, did you steal it, Mr. Courtney?
No, I didn't get it.
I've got it, I'm sorry. I had it right where I put it. The city attorney states, the board may consider whether the building is used for public worship and reasonably closely related activities or uses. Actually, I should have read the first part of it, which I'll read it in its entirety. When considering whether a proposed building is a place of worship, under Michigan law, there is no requirement that the principal use be solely for worship. The board may consider whether the building is used for public worship and reasonably closely related activities or uses. My questions in regard to the attorney, the same, I'm sorry, sir, I just can't say your maiden. Waffle, okay. In regard to the Carpathia Club, I asked if what his observations were, and I'm not familiar with the Carpathia Club, but my children have played a lot of soccer games against them. When I look at the three things that were identified, sports, to preserve culture, and retain languages, either the home, from the country of origin or English. I find that conflicts severely with, and I'll be quoting Dr. Amin's letter, 7-page letter in response to the city questions in depth. Those listed activities under the heading, the intended or proposed use of the facility are as follows. 32 topics of discussion, and I'm not going to read all 32, but I'm going to read a few of them. New insights into engineering miracles of the Quran, as Dr. Amin listed as a speaker. The importance of Islamic finance. Scientific explanations of earthquake using the Holy Quran. Again, Dr. Amin. Wisdom in fasting and Ramadan. If you read this list of activities, it shows up under the heading, proposed uses of facilities. They are the only activities that are expressed, or I'm sorry, written. They are all pertain specifically to the Islamic faith. 14 of them are led by IAMS. 4 of them reference, 4 of the others reference the Quran as a text. And I do not find, other than some general statements prior to that heading, proposed uses of the facility. I find 3 other references to activities using that word that are general in statement that do allude to the preservation of culture. They also include a statement on page 1 that is in essence a mission statement for any faith-driven, faith-based organization in this city, and I would venture to say throughout the country. So I do take, it creates a difficulty in my mind. In conclusion, Mr. Chairman, I think the best thing I can do is read a prepared statement in making the determination that I came to. And I think it was said here, it's in 2 or 3 different documents, that were to arrive at these conclusions independently. That's in our one of the documents when you sign your oath. And I think it's the intent of what we do. I want to assure everybody here that that's exactly what I did. I used Dr. Amin's statement as a primary source, and the attorney's, the city attorney's letter of instruction in doing so. Included in the written information provided by our city staff, there are 2 documents that are central to my conclusions. The first is a 2-page memo from the city attorney's office dated November 10th, 2013. It includes the following statement, quote, "When considering whether a proposed building is a place of worship under Michigan law, there is no requirement that the principal use be solely for worship. The board may consider whether the building is used for public worship and reasonably closely related activities or uses," unquote. The second document provided by our city staff pertaining to this issue is a 7-page letter written by Dr. Nurul Amin dated September 30th, 2013 that I just quoted from partially. Dr. Amin is identified as the applicant's representative in a letter from the city manager dated November 26, 2013. As the applicant's representative, Dr. Amin's letter is a definitive document in determining the principal use of the property located at 4924 Rochester Road. His letter confirms that both worship and related activities will take place in this building. On page 3, Dr. Amin acknowledges that, quote, prayer and meditation may occur, unquote. The Arabic word salat defines the 5 daily prayers as, quote, ritual prayers for worship, unquote, and are a religious duty that must be performed daily. Recognizing that prayer is the second pillar of Islam, it is reasonable to conclude that these ritual prayers of worship will occur on a regular basis by one or more people who are in the facility during one of the times for prayer. This establishes the fact that the building will be used for public worship, even though it may not be the principal use. The reasonably closely related activities or use portion of the definition given in the city attorney's memo is also confirmed in Dr. Amin's letter. The heading proposed uses of the facility appear in bold type on page 4 of his letter. The only activities identified after this heading are 32 discussion points specific to the Islamic faith and are all religious in nature. As I said before, 14 topics list IMs as speakers, 4 other topics use the Quran as a text. This letter also has 3 additional references to past, intended, or current activities that occur on pages 1, 2, and 4. All are prior to the heading titled Proposed Uses of the Facility. They are similar, sometimes identical, to the 32 discussion topics first mentioned, both in tone, word usage, and intent. Every activity discussed in Dr. Amin's letter facilitates the use of this building for the purpose stated on the bottom of page 2 of his letter. That purpose reads as follows, quote, a place to guide our community with required training, unquote. These activities and their purpose fall well within the reasonable, closely related activities or uses portion of the city attorney's language that is used to define a place of worship. The statements of fact quoted from both Dr. Amin's letter and the city attorney's memo confirm my conclusion that place of worship is the only term in the zoning ordinance list of definitions that accurately describes the intended uses of this building, unquote, or I'm finished with the letter. I have 10 copies of this statement for those board members who would like one for Dr. Amin and the city attorney likewise. I'll conclude by saying that the question regarding finances, although important, are not a part of within our scope to use in making the determinations that we make. Our sole function as a zoning board of appeals is to determine whether a requested, in this case interpretation, or variance is reasonable is according to the rules that govern our conduct. I appreciate your attention. Dr. Amin, I would like to conclude by saying that I recognize you as a man of faith, of deep faith, and I wish you and your organization the best of luck in the endeavors that you're trying to accomplish. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Bloomingdale. Mr. Courtney.
Yes, I would like to say that I think what they're doing is very commendable, but I did talk to people at Cornerstone, Woodside, Kensington. Every one of them conducts classes similar to those that are listed here, as well as as well as getting into line dancing and even basketball, which gets more into the community center activity than these activities do. But each one of these churches conducts Bible classes, Spanish classes, youth classes, all types of classes. Their main objective is religious. They have things that are not directly religious, like the basketball at Woodside, the Spanish classes at Cornerstone, as well as at Kensington at times. Those types of things are meant to draw people, draw the youth in, or they're used indirectly to get people into the church. They're a little more community center than this is. I would like to see this place here, but I think they've got to be classed as a church, come back and file for their variance, or find another location where they won't need a variance. But each one of the churches spends more time on related activities that are not directly worship activities than they do the worship activity. And if you wanted to go into details, I have about 4 or 5 pages of details on each of the churches.
Mr. Courtney, will you accept a question for me?
Pardon?
Will you accept a question for me?
Sure.
This distinction was important for me, not trying to sell you on any point, but like, for example, some of the facilities you mentioned, to me, the distinguishing characteristic when I thought about this over the weekend was they have the large worship services, what I'll call traditional Christian on Sunday, sometimes Saturday services, whereas this facility, and it's partly related to how they worship, they don't behave in that kind of manner. They do their prayers, but when I looked at, like, I had like a, the scale where you put weights on the scale and it kind of goes back and forth. I kept putting it on, and to me, it seemed to tilt in the favor of like education, which was religious, but education type activities, but not worshiping as I think of it as a Lutheran, Yeah. So that's kind of where I see where you're coming from. I don't. My question to you is the fact of them having services on the weekend or not having services a factor?
I don't think that's the major factor. It's the amount of time that's spent on these other activities at churches far outnumber the religious service.
Okay.
Much greater, that percentage of time as opposed to the percentage of time here on religious activities that are not, the main stem is to present the culture to the youth, and is to activate the youth. At least I would think the main, or to the younger parishioners, except if you'll excuse the wording. And that's the same thing in all of these churches. The main activity is to bring people in and keep the culture going.
Right. Gotcha. Understand. Okay, thank you. Additional information from board or comments from board members? Or is there anybody? Mr. Lambert?
Yeah, question for staff. I know one of the hiccups we had last month when we dealt with this was the notice that went out to adjoining property owners. This time, apparently, that situation was straightened out. Approximately how many adjoining property owners received notice of this meeting tonight?
I could give you a quick estimate in a minute or two. I'd have to look up the file and do a manual count.
I don't think the number's necessary, but is it within 300 feet of the property? Is that how it's determined?
Yes, if you go to the property borders, 300 feet, any property 300 feet away would be sent a notice.
And as far as I mean, the people that came up to speak tonight, by and large, did not give us where they were located. I think the only one who publicly stated that he was affected by this, who had an adjoining property, was the famous Tim who came up to speak to us. So I don't know if the other people in the adjoining areas didn't identify themselves or just don't feel that this is affecting their residents. So that's why I was curious about that. Thank you.
Mr. Evans, if I recall, there was Mr. Tim, I guess we'll put it in his business, but last month, I thought there were 2 eastern adjoining residential properties that spoke in opposition. I have in my mind 3 adjoining property members, or 3 adjoining property owners had definite issues. Although one's a little soft now that I think about it, but definitely 2. One was a homeowner who mentioned the bacon smell. I guess he liked it. And then second was the business owner.
The business owner to the north.
North, right. Yes. So, and I don't know how many adjoining properties there were, but that's what my recollection between the 2 meetings was. Can you confirm that, or what's your recollection, I guess?
Yeah, I recall that we had a male resident on Bradley Street, and then the property owner adjacent to the north.
Okay. Mr. Clark.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think that not in order to quell any discussion, but I think it would be appropriate at this point in time to make a motion, and then, of course, discussion could ensue from that point, and if of course, if it's properly seconded. So I would just like to make a motion for discussion purposes, and the motion would state that the Troy Zoning Board of Appeals interprets the proposed use of the property in question is that of a house of worship.
Okay. Is there a second of the motion?
Or would be a house of
Would
worship.
be a worship, okay.
Support.
Let me recognize that we have a motion that identifies the facilities used as a house of worship.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
Just as a point of clarification, there's no definition of house of worship. I would ask that the appropriate term be used.
Worship.
Place of worship.
Okay.
That's completely acceptable to me,
Support.
Support.
to the Clark Courtney motion.
Okay. So we have a motion on the floor to identify it as a place of worship, and it's been supported by one board member, well, 2 board members, brought forth by one board member, seconded by another. So at this point, I would like to discuss this motion and keep our discussion aimed at this motion, and we'll go forward from there, resolve the issue, and keep debating, or et cetera. But is there any comments or input from the board relative to the motion presently before us?
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Clark.
I'd like to speak to my motion.
Please do.
Yeah, I know it's late and I don't want to be long, so I'll just try and be brief. But I really want to commend my colleagues here, hearing questions and statements. Having served on the board for many years, there's a lot of insight, I think, that I didn't pick up, which I can't say that rezoning a, small parcel, sometimes there's only so many ways to slice and dice it, but there are lots of different issues and concerns here, and I really appreciate Mr. Bloomingdale's comments and Mr. Courtney's comments, and certainly Mr. Eisenbacher's comments earlier. So they were really quite eye-opening to me because I had chewed on this over the weekend myself. So having said all that, I think, as Mr. Courtney said, we can talk all day long about the attributes of what the property owners in question would like to do. But we have to look at what the zoning classifications are for our city. And I don't believe in a Houston-style system where you can do anything on any parcel. I think people moved to Troy, and what made Troy great was really a set of rules that people knew and had to follow if they decided to buy commercial or real residential property here. And so that's the concerning thing here to me. But at the end of the day, we can talk about all, like I said, all the great things that could be done there or still might be done, depending on how this motion proceeds. That's really beside the point. And some of them sound really very noteworthy and admirable, quite frankly. But the fact is, it's about that parcel in that corner of Troy regarding that neighborhood and surrounding neighbors. So having said all that, I do believe that it's really unconscionable to me that an organization would come forward and have the classification filed with the IRS, our federal government, and the state of Michigan, saying one thing and then coming forward and claiming another. And I'm not saying that paperwork can't be done inappropriately, but to Mr. Eisenbacher's statements earlier, that felonious, it was attested to that felonious or misstatements weren't made with the government. So, and I think there was a comment by one of the residents about making sure that the paperwork's proper. But beyond all that, I think Mr. Courtney and Mr. Bloomingdale made a lot of excellent comments as well. So it's not that I believe I'm not coming to this conclusion based on anything other than the facts that Mr. Bloomingdale referenced. But, and I also think it's the best thing for Troy. Once again, where these folks may end up, or if it is right back here in Troy, that's, if the rules are followed and all the paperwork is proper and there's no falsification or misstatements, I think that things should proceed. So I'll be very interested to see how the motion fares. I'm voting yes in favor of this motion.
Thank you, Mr. Clark. Excuse me,
Clarify his last comment.
Mr. Krantz has a question. He's asking you to clarify your last comment.
In favor of?
Well, in favor of my motion, the Clark-Courtney motion, which is essentially the interpretation as the city management and city attorney have asked, that it is a place of worship.
Thank you.
Are there additional comments or input on this motion that's before us?
Well,
Mr. Krantz?
Yeah, I always have to refer to our guidelines. And again, I'm going to be citing out of our Zoning Board of Appeals handbook, and this is regarding interpretations. And it's a quite lengthy discussion, but what it comes down to, it says interpretations on zoning ordinance itself and any relevant, should be based on any relevant historical information. Commonly, these rules are of walk like a duck variety. And what they're trying to say, if it looks like a duck, it walks like a duck, it's a duck. I'm not saying that this is going to be a mosque, but I certainly feel it's centered around a religion. It is not centered around a community center. I guess what I have is maybe a question for staff to help me out on this. Other organizations that we have in Troy, like the, I believe it's called the maybe it's the Polish American Cultural Center, maybe it's the Polish American Cultural Center, the Boys and Girls Club, the other gentleman that was here from the, was it the Baltic? Or Baltic Cultural Area. Are there setbacks required for those buildings?
For each case, I'd have to refer to the site plan and the case of the project file to determine what the use is, when it was built, what the ordinance says, and how it fit in with their development standards that were different when these uses were established compared to what we have today. So I think
It's lengthy.
It's on a property by property basis, yes.
Okay. Well, it's, then I go back to my planning commission sort of mode. And again, this is not, maybe not relevant directly to how we classify this or interpret this, but it has to go with the overall planning of our city. Because we're such a diversity, I personally welcome every culture to come into the city and provide whatever benefits they do for the greater community or even their own groups. But but the planning part is to place these in places where they fit in our overall plan. When I read from our zoning ordinance, again referring back to the documents that we really have to use, the intent of neighborhood nodes is derived from the 2008 City of Troy Master Plan, which specifically identifies 21 specific intersections that play a critical role in the daily function, image, quality of life, and continuity, and continued viability of the city. These nodes vary widely, I'm going to emphasize that, vary widely in character, but share common characteristics. Neighborhood nodes are meant to serve as the core of the economic neighborhoods. When I was listening to all this going on back when we were discussing this, the idea of a neighborhood zone, was to create a little shopping hub, so that we're trying to make this a more walkable, bikeable community away from this traffic thing. And the idea was to make these little shopping districts at these major mile road intersections a place people could walk to or bike to without having to get in their car just to pick up a loaf of bread or a gallon of milk or whatever they needed. And it just kind of goes against my understanding of these neighborhood nodes. Why would we be putting a place of worship in one of those nodes? Now, especially, there is one node that has a place of worship in it. It's in Node O, and it's been designated in our ordinance as such. Hang on a second, right? I just lost my stack of stuff. Oh, here it is. This happens to be neighborhood node L. Intersections, and Mr. Courtney recited already. Intersections L, M, and U should remain predominantly commercial, catering to local needs and regional traffic, to develop and redevelop, new development and redevelopment, that's what we're doing here, redevelopment, should be mostly commercial. So, it just sort of goes against the whole plan of planning the city. We set this plan in motion, and yet we're saying the use is now going to shift from commercial shopping to a place of worship. That's another issue. I realize that's a city issue. But for me to say, put that aside, put all the city this master plan and ordinance took years to develop, put all that aside and say, it doesn't apply here. I find that unbelievable, I think, or unjustified, or whatever the term I could use, as far as the direction the city's going to even allow this in the first place. That said, like I said, I'm relying on the tools that are given to me as a member of the zoning board, which is our handbook and the ordinance. And I can find nothing in here, and on any of those documents, that tells me this should be, the use in this zone should be anything but commercial. And I feel there's, like I said, from the interpretation standpoint, I feel it is highly centered around religion, and it's not, it's not a community center to me. I realize the functions are going to be there, are community related for their own community. But like Dr. Min said, it's going to be used for their membership. It doesn't open up the whole community. I mean, that was his quote was something like, a center for our members. So I'm having a very difficult time calling it a community center like those other activities, like the Polish American place where you can go there and have weddings or whatever you want, or our community center in Troy, or even that example from the lawyer Carpathian Club. None of those are centered around religion. So I guess I'm going to have to agree with the resolution on the table.
Mr. Chairman?
Thank you, Mr. Crenn.
I just wanted
Mr.
to
Courtney.
indicate the Polish Club used to be an architectural museum. The setback there is quite large. I think the Balkan Club is the old Elks Club, and it has a very, very large setback. The other one, I'm not sure.
Girls and Boys Club. That's got a decent setback. Yeah.
Not a great setback like the other two, but it is a little bit more than this.
One just quick follow-up with staff. Since they're talking, this is a community center for educating their youth, and that's very admirable. What are the setbacks for schools in Troy?
I'd have to look.
Okay.
I suspect.
Actually,
have we ever seen a school built to the property lines?
Right now, the state law allows the state superintendent to have exclusive jurisdiction over the construction of new schools, not the city. So in effect, we we don't regulate it with our zoning ordinance. Not for public schools anyways.
Mr. Bloomingdale, you have a comment?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. You've allowed me a lot of time, and I'll be brief. Specifically to decision-making, and specific to the particular issue in front of us. We are not allowed to consider the definition of community center because it does not appear in the zoning ordinance. I don't see the attorney objecting, the city attorney objecting to that comment, and I'm going to move on. I want to speak for a minute about the requirement to make independent decisions in regard to every issue that we are asked to. I know the gentleman that I'm working with on this board. I know him as men of being of high integrity, and they adhere to that like the rest of the, as we all do. I also want to say that we have a lot of verbal testimony tonight that's admirable, but only one or two speakers spoke to the issue of defining the intended use of this property. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bloomingdale. Are there others with the board who would have anything to say before we get to the point of calling the question on this particular motion? Mr. Eisenbacher.
I just want to thank my colleagues for bringing up all these points. I mean, several items that I hadn't considered were brought forth in your statements, and it is through the collective knowledge and sharing this information that we're able to come to a decision.
Thank you, Mr. Eisenbacher. Mr. Lambert, I believe you might be the only person who hasn't commented on this. Do you have anything you'd like to add?
Well, I'd like to add, number one, I think to reiterate what Mr. Bloomingdale said was there were a lot of fine comments made by people tonight, but the ones that I paid most attention to were those ones that spoke directly to the issue. Number one, is this a place of worship or something else? Secondly, some of the concerns about if it's defined as a place of worship, what are the impacts on traffic, on parking, on adjacent homeowners? The one thing that I think that kind of has tripped us up in this whole thing is this a religious organization? And I think everyone would admit to the fact that, yes, it's religious. The question that comes in front of this board, though, is this a place of worship or not? And from the information I've got, there's conflicting information. I mean, on the one hand, you have some testimony by some fine people who say it's not going to be a place of worship, but then we get confusing information from some of the official paperwork that's been filed with various governmental bodies. There are those who would say that the petitioners are being deceitful about their intent. I would put the best construction on what they are saying in two different ways. Number one, I think the goal of the group is eventually to get a mosque here in Troy. And I don't think anyone on this board, or probably hardly anyone in this city, would object to that. But as a step-by-step process, I'm sure that this community center they're planning is part of that long-term process of getting a mosque here in the city. So I'm sure there was some confusion on their part about, you know, how do we classify the steps we're going to take to achieve that goal. Secondly, as I think our chairman would point out, we've all had dealings with filling out paperwork, whether it's for the IRS, the state of Michigan, or even the city of Troy, that if I don't think any of us could go back in our life and say, that person filled out all the paperwork properly the way they were supposed to. So I would put the best construction on the intent of the petitioners here and say that they were trying to do the right thing, but they got messed up on the paperwork. I would generally say that I really don't know what the petitioner plans on doing here. I think a more appropriate interpretation than that, rather than being a place of worship, is it's a place of assembly, and leave it at that. I would prefer to see more information gathered to have, so some of the questions I have be answered. Until those questions are answered, I could not vote in favor of Mr. Clark's motion to define it as a place of worship until some of my questions were answered.
Thank you, Mr. Lambert. I would only add that the information provided by my colleagues, and I know I put a lot of time into this, and they put a lot of time into this too. It's obvious from their input. They brought up items that I, in some cases, considered, in some cases came up with a different conclusion, or in some cases I say, wow, you see something I didn't. I'm not going to change my opinion in the end, but I greatly respect their view, and it's a well-founded opinions that we all have. So as long as there is no additional input from the board, I would like to have Mr. Evans call the question. Anybody have anything last to add?
Mr. Chairman, just might clarify so we're all aware, and especially for the people watching it here in person, that the exact nature of the motion Mr. Clark has made is to classify this as a place of worship, if I'm not correct.
That is correct.
Okay, thank you.
And if you vote yes, you would be classifying as such. No means you're not. Mr. Evans?
Mr. Krent?
Yes.
Mr. Lambert?
No.
Mr. Bloomingdale?
Yes.
Mr. Clark?
Yes.
Mr. Courtney?
Yes.
Mr. Eisenbacher?
Yes.
Mr. Neal?
No.
Motion passes 5-2.
Thank you, Mr. Evans. Okay, the guidance that we're going to be providing back to the city government is that the intended use is as of a place of worship. At this point, as I understand it, the city administration will move through and work with the owner of the property, explaining what that means, and they will have to consider their options at this point. That closes out 4C in Section 4, hearing of cases on the agenda is closed. Item 5 of the agenda is communications. I have none. Do you have anything, Paul? No? I'm going to close out item 5 and move on to miscellaneous business. I have no miscellaneous business.
I have one.
Do you, Mr. Courtney?
I think that we should ask the Planning Commission to consider whether there should be a community center definition, and if so, what the requirement should be.
Okay.
Because I think before the city indicates community center again, we should have a solid definition. If they think place of assembly is sufficient, that would be good too, but I think they should.
Well, I agree with what you're saying, that it shouldn't be something we discuss. Do you mind, or would you be open to that be an agenda item for, let's say, next month's meeting?
If there's discussion to be had on it, yes.
Sure.
That's fine.
All right. Is there any comment from anybody else about taking that forward to the next month? Okay. I'm going to close out items.
Yeah.
Sorry. Pardon me?
Yeah, I think that'd be a very good item to have as a discussion point. But just as an interpretation, what would we be doing? We'd just be asking the Planning Commission, basically through our representative, please go back and consider this. I mean, we're not necessarily going to provide any input. We just want to see better clarification because of the difficulty we've experienced in this issue.
Well, Mr. Krent, do you think you've already heard enough, perhaps, to take that back? Oh, sorry.
Yeah, did you want to go ahead and just make a motion now to that effect, so it's clear to the commission? And then Mr. Krent's here as well. He's the representative on the commission.
Mr. Chair. Absolutely. We need a definition in our ordinance that states exactly what a community center is, what the setbacks are, other requirements necessary for that definition. We've got, as a planning commission, this year we will be focused on reviewing the master plan, which is the first step before the ordinances are written, and after that, reviewing the ordinance, see what the holes. We've got, this board has seen a lot of holes in that ordinance over the past year, I've seen. And a lot of those have to be addressed, and I've got a list from, that's one of the wonderful things about having me, a member of the Planning Commission serve on this board, is because we can see where the inadequacies are in our ordinance. And I've got a running list right now of things that need to be addressed, and I'll forward all this information from all of last year to the Planning Commission, so we can review it and make decisions.
Mr. Lambert?
One thing related to that too was, and I asked Mr. Miller about this last month, the reason for why place of worship has higher setback requirements. And he gave a great answer. The one thing that kind of puzzled me though was, I attend a church where we were lucky if we have 15 people attending that service. So to apply the standards to a small church that you would to a large church like a Kensington or Faith seems to be a need for a little bit more administrative discretion.
Understood. Mr. Clerk.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I believe to Mr. Evans' point about making a motion, a public body speaks officially through a resolution. So even though we do have a planning commissioner who sits on this board, that's all nice and fine, but at the end of the day, that does not indicate, if the majority wants to express an opinion one way or another. And I think Mr. Courtney is in favor of perhaps making a motion, so I think that might be advisable.
Get there. I think it's
I'm happy with the other. In fact, there's probably more on the long list that I'd like to see in there too.
Well, that's why I was wondering.
Or maybe you'd bring back the long list and we'll consider the whole mess.
I'll do that. I'll at our next gathering, I'll have matter of fact, I don't know if it's appropriate just to either email you directly, or maybe it has to go through the city offices.
I would.
I'll give my list to Mr. Evans, and he can distribute it among the board.
I can put it under, in the agenda packet, and we can discuss it under perhaps communications.
Sure.
Just to start things up.
Would it be better to take the time, compile that a little neater, address it next month then?
Yeah.
It seems so, it seems that we can make better progress that way. Okay. Item 7, public comment. This is the section of the meeting where there is a mechanism for public comment on many issues, whether they be zoning in general, something you want to speak to the board about. I'm going to open that up to the gallery. You have the option of coming forward. We're going to use a 3-minute time limit, but if there's any additional public comment, feel free to come forward. I think you want to speak, sir?
Yeah.
Please come forward.
Yeah, my name is Bilal Ghazi, and I have a small business.
Microphone, please. Oh, I'm sorry. Thank you.
I'm living in Troy. So as a business mind, I'm thinking like that. This is at, how much, 220 car parking? Okay. If I buy that property and I open, like I do not do like this one, but this is a commercial property and I have money, I want to do, I open a bar. That is good, or this is the community, the things is open there. Because community means, I think, suppose one of our community is good, but he is working in GM. He has extra time, he come to the community center and bring our kids, and he teach them how is physics, how is chemistry. This is the help. That kind of things. And I'm thinking what discussing is here is religion. Religion is my belief. Nobody can change that one, what is inside my heart, what is inside my mind. Everybody is like that. Religion is personal thing. That's why people sometimes, they born some religion, and when he grow, he think he change the religion. So religion is totally personal. So there will be the pray come in, and somebody will go to the pray. I don't know what is the problem there. It is saying there, this is the community center. So we have to focus. This building is good enough for the community center, and this is the enough parking lot for that. And what they are do, this is the Muslim community center. They will pray. If this is the Hindu community center, they will do their pray. This is my belief. Understand? I don't know the many things. So my concern is like that. If this is a community center, so we have to concern. This building is good enough for this kind of traffic come in and this kind of things. I'm thinking this need to. There is most issue is come in is pray. my understanding is prayer is my personal thing. So if my humble request to consider that one, this prayer, I pray my home. I have a small shop, Mr. Evans knows. I pray in my store. Understand? Some customer is there, I stand in the corner, I pray. I don't care. If some customer maybe don't like, maybe he will not come back my store. I don't care. This is my business. So that is my concern. So my humble request, please think about that. Prayer is not the main concern is coming here, because Mr. Amin, he is the great guy and he invests money. I am poor guy. I cannot invest money to help the community.
Thank you, sir. Is there anyone else who would like to speak during the public comment section? Come ahead, come ahead, sir. Thank you.
I know it's been a long night, so I'll make my points very brief. Just 2 points I would like to end with. Number one, this is one of the best meetings that I have ever attended. I applaud you, Mr. Chairman, for conducting a very fair meeting, giving a chance to everybody to speak, giving an opportunity to everybody to express their point. I thank the staff for staying late and for respecting the tradition, the prayers, the culture for everybody of this community. This community is very diverse, and respecting everybody and every member of the committee with this kind of regards, that's pleased my heart, just to say the least. Number two is, regardless of the decision, I believe it's a very fair decision because it came out of long discussion and you heard everybody and everybody expressed their point of view. The second point I would like to make is, regardless of the decision, our Muslim brothers and sisters are an integral part of this community. Not because we made the decision one way or another that means that they are not welcome. They are welcome in our homes, they are welcome in our communities, they are welcome to share in the prayers. They are just an integral part and cannot do without in this community. So I thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Is there anyone else who would like to speak before the board as part of public comment? Seeing no one, I'm going to close the public comment section. I'm going to move to section 8, which is adjournment. Thank you all for coming. Thank you for staff for staying so late. And thank you for the board for all your hard work. And we will see you all in February.